Man-Eaters, The Last Refuge by Thomas Jacob. Fire and ice. Some say the world will end in fire, some say in ice. From what I've tasted of desire, I hold with those who favor fire. But if it had to perish twice, I think I know enough of hate to say that for destruction ice is also great and would suffice. Robert Frost. Chapter 1. Year 3 of the Great Infection, the Arctic region, Kamchatka Peninsula, Russian Far East. It was the start of spring. The snow was melting. Katya could see the bright green grass beginning to push through the slush, and the pink bog rosemary flowers blooming defiantly amid patches of gleaming white. It was a brief, fragile beauty in an otherwise brutal land. His father walked swiftly ahead, moving up the rocky, unforgiving terrain with practiced ease. Katya, struggling to keep up, breathed heavily as he clambered across the uneven ground, his boots crunching over gravel and sliding through patches of wet slush. He was only 15, still growing into himself, still learning to match his father's strength. A Tuktuak, his father, was a towering figure, broad-shouldered and powerfully built. He wore a wolf's head in a thick fur coat, the traditional symbol of a Nenec chieftain. The Nenecs had roamed this wilderness for generations, herding reindeer across the cold, empty sweep of Siberia. Their way of life had always been hard, but now it was almost impossible. "Will they come?" Katya asked, his voice low, almost lost in the wind. His father didn't answer. He only grunted. The scouts had been gone for over a year. No word, no signal. Katya wondered where they were, or if they were even alive. Smokey, their dog, ran alongside him, keeping perfect pace. A powerful black animal, she looked more like a shadow than a pet. She was said to be a mix between a Samoyed husky and a Siberian wolf, fierce, fast, and loyal. Katya had found her 4 years ago, abandoned on the outskirts of a coastal village, shivering and near death during a bitter winter. He'd taken her in, nursed her, and watched her grow into a beast that feared nothing. She's so big now, Katya thought, watching her perk up suddenly. Smokey caught the scent of a sable, those quick ferret-like creatures common in the taiga, and bolted off into the brush, chasing it through the low shrubs. The coastal villages were all empty now. Everyone had moved inland, deep into Siberia's heart, terrified by the rumors, the ones about the man-eaters said to cross the sea from Alaska. The thought alone made Katya shiver. His father never spoke of them. Neither did the outsiders who had taken shelter with the tribe. But the silence only made it worse. Everyone knew. They were coming, eventually. Humanity was dying. The monsters had taken the world. They always came, even here. No place was safe. The age of man was ending. The age of the man-eater had begun. Katya shook the thoughts from his mind. He focused on the climb, scrambling up a narrow trail between thorny bushes and wind-bent wildflowers until they reached the summit. The view was breathtaking. Behind him, green and white hills rolled out like frozen waves all the way to the horizon. In front, the land dropped away in a sheer 100-meter cliff into the open sea. His father stopped at the edge and reached into his birch bark knapsack. From it, he pulled a battered pair of old binoculars and began scanning the water. Katya stood beside him, silent. No matter how many times he came here, he felt the same way. Small, fragile, overwhelmed by the cold vastness. There had been a time, when he was younger, when this place felt sacred, when he believed the gods might still whisper in the wind, but not anymore. Now his heart was too heavy. The waiting, the not knowing, the dread of what was to come, it was slowly wearing him down from the inside. Still, he looked to the sea, scanning the horizon for the long-awaited sailboat. But he held little hope. The scouts had been gone too long. It was unlikely they were ever coming back. The winter ice had begun to break. Large white chunks floated out across the blue-gray sea. Pigeon guillemots, black and white seabirds, swarmed overhead in the thousands. It was nesting season. Their shrill cries filled the air as they circled and dove for fish. Katya stepped closer to the edge and looked down. Far below, a fat seal lounged lazily on a floating slab of ice, its gray body glistening. A mile out, a pod of orcas surfaced in silence. their misty sprays catching the light like fleeting ghosts. Atuktuak slowly lowered his binoculars. His face, tough and weathered by years of storms, showed no expression, no fear, no joy, just the same unshakable calm. Katya looked at him. "They will come," his father said softly, his voice deep and certain. "If not today, then tomorrow." Tuk had gone on the dangerous journey across the sea to America with 8 men from the tribe to bring back news. It was a mission of survival, one that could change everything. They had to find out the truth. What were these man-eaters they had heard about in whispers and nightmares? Were there any survivors left beyond the ocean? The questions had haunted them for years. All contact with other humans had ceased. No more traders, no more messengers, no signs of other tribes on the annual migration north. The old routes they once traveled felt like paths to nowhere. Villages were hollowed out, towns stripped bare, their emptiness screaming louder than any warning ever could. The world had gone quiet. Since there was no more trade with the coastal villages, the scouts were also tasked with bringing back vital supplies, fuel for the snowmobiles, kerosene for the lamps, bullets for the rifles, and strong iron tools. The tribe had been surviving, but barely. Now, on the windswept cliff above the Arctic waters, Atuktuak unstrapped a long coil of rope from his broad shoulders and threw it to Katya. The sheer rock face beside them was covered with the nests of guillemots, hundreds of pale eggs perched delicately on narrow ledges and cracks in the stone. They were a rare treat, a welcome change from the reindeer meat and fish that had fed the tribe through the bitter winter months. But collecting them was dangerous. Katya knew he had to be fully focused. One mistake could cost him his life. He fastened one end of the rope securely around his waist, his fingers working quickly and precisely. His father checked the knots twice, tugged the rope sharply to test it, then slowly began to lower Katya down the cliff. Katya clung to the cold stone face, inching his way toward a wide ledge. The wind was strong, whistling in his ears, and the birds screeched wildly as he disturbed their nests. He waved them off, careful not to slip, and began filling the birch basket strapped to his shoulders with the large speckled eggs. It was exhausting work. His muscles burned. His hands trembled with effort. By the time the basket was full, his arms and legs felt like lead. He double-tugged the rope, the signal. His father began pulling him up, slow and steady. When Katya finally clambered back over the edge, he collapsed onto the cliff, drained. His father examined the full basket of eggs, gave a small nod, and said nothing. But Katya saw it in his eyes. Pride. That night, the moon shone bright and clear in the Arctic sky. With the slow coming of spring, the weather had begun to turn. There was a scent of wildflowers in the crisp air, and the rhythmic chorus of insects buzzed beneath the sharp hoots of distant owls. The tribe had set up camp in a wide clearing beside a thawing river, deep in the heart of the taiga. Towering conifers, pine, spruce, and larch, stood like guardians around them, their branches heavy with snowmelt. The camp was made up of 4 large baylocks and a nearby corral. Each baylock was a square portable hut built from reindeer skin stretched over wooden frames. The structures were mounted on spruce sled rollers, allowing the tribe to move them easily during migrations. Inside, they were warm and practical, equipped with beds, tables, and small heating stoves. The thick reindeer hides served as insulation, shielding them from the Arctic cold. The tribe's dogs, 14 massive huskies and 2 small, curious pups, were tied to iron stakes driven deep into the earth. The temperature had been rising steadily over the past week, and tonight, the mood around the bonfire was light. A large pan of guillemot eggs sizzled over the flames. Everyone received generous portions. Katya sat cross-legged, chewing slowly on a piece of dried reindeer meat. The fire crackled in front of him, casting shadows that danced across the circle of faces. The women were telling stories, old legends passed down for generations, tales of sea monsters, vengeful spirits, and strange, shape-shifting animals. The children leaned in wide-eyed, caught in the spell of the words. His older brother, Oranon, sat nearby, devouring his bowl of fish soup with both hands. At 17, Oranon was pudgy and carefree, unbothered by anything beyond the next meal. But Katya worried. If something ever happened to their father, Oranon would have to lead the tribe. Could he do it? Katya already knew the answer. Across the fire, Aunt Yukai sat silently. She was the eldest, nearly 100 years old. Blind and frail, she was still revered as the tribe's shamanic healer. Her face was turned skyward as she murmured prayers to the stars, lips moving in ancient rhythms only she understood. Beside Katya, his 8-year-old sister, Upu, gently stroked Smokey's thick black fur. Smokey, as always, was untethered. Unlike the other dogs, she refused to be tied. If someone tried, she would howl, thrash, and whine until they relented. She didn't make a good sled dog either. She had too much wolf in her. Sometimes she would vanish into the forest for days, but she always returned to Katya. She was fiercely loyal. If anyone raised their voice at him, Smokey would bare her teeth in a dangerous snarl. "Wolves are not dogs," his mother used to say, scolding him. "You should never have brought her into the camp." Katya would ignore her. "What did you see from the cliff?" Upu asked, her small voice cutting through the crackling of the fire. Katya didn't answer. He was staring across the flames, eyes fixed on the man sitting opposite him. Something about him didn't feel right. The professor had once been a middle-aged high school teacher, a man with a mortgage, papers to grade, and the endless grind of family responsibilities. But that life was long gone. Out here in the remote, merciless Siberian wilderness, he had begun to see himself differently, not as a teacher, but as a warrior. And warriors prepare for battle. But against whom? The man-eaters or the tribe? He crouched beside the fire, a small wooden bowl in his hand. With solemn precision, he smeared streaks of mud and blood across his face. The blood had come from an Arctic fox he had skinned earlier that day, an animal caught in one of the outlying traps set by the tribe. He dipped his fingers into the bowl again, drawing another crimson line under his eyes. Beside him sat 3 boys, Rob, Mark, and Elvis, all in their late teens, but already broad-shouldered, athletic, and imposing. Katya watched from the shadows. The wilderness had suited them too well. They had adapted to the cold, to the ice, to the lawlessness of the wild. The professor leaned in, whispering urgently. Then, with an eerie sense of ritual, he slid the bowl to them. One by one, the boys painted their faces with blood. Katya felt a chill crawl down his spine. They were doing this in front of everyone, a silent, deliberate act, a message, a challenge. The 4 of them had grown more dominant with each passing month. At first, it had been subtle, mocking the younger children, rude jokes at the women's expense. But now they were always whispering, always scheming, always angry, dissatisfied with everything, restless, dangerous. They had changed so much. Katya remembered the first time he'd seen them, 2 years ago, half dead, faces hollow, lips blue with cold. Their ship had gone down in the Bering Sea, and out of a group of 53, only 7 had survived, stranded and freezing on the desolate Siberian shore. The tribe had rescued them, nursed them, fed them, welcomed them. And now? Now the survivors were part of the tribe. They had learned the language, shared the customs, but the balance had shifted after the scouts had gone to America. Katya sensed it every day. "What did you see from the cliff?" asked Upu again, her voice small and persistent. "Nothing," Katya said, still watching the blood ritual. "Just birds and seals." "No demons?" she asked in a whisper. "There are no demons here, Upu." "Not yet," she murmured, "but they will come. That's what Aunt Yukai says." Katya turned to look at his little sister. Her eyes were wide and worried. "You're going to be safe," he assured her gently. "Father will never let anything happen to you. And don't listen to Aunt Yukai. She once told me that when she was young, she was eaten by a bear, and then came out." Upu gasped. "How? Did the bear vomit her out?" Katya grinned. "No, she came out the other way." Upu shrieked with laughter. "I'm going to tell this to the other children." He watched her scamper off, barefoot on the thawing earth. But the question lingered in his mind. What will happen to my family if the man-eaters come? Ever since the scouts had left for America, the tribe's balance of power had quietly begun to shift. Now only 2 grown men remained, his father, a Tuktuak, and Ukik, who was 24. Katya and his older brother Oranon were still teenagers. Everyone else was women and children. And then there were the high school survivors. Of them, Katya trusted Timothy, Lillian, and Kiara. They were kind, grateful, quiet. They did their share of camp work without complaint. He could see it in their eyes. They still missed home, missed their families. They hadn't become like Rob or the professor. There was no malice in them. Katya's mother, Arnak, came over and sat next to him. She ruffled his hair playfully. "Do you want a story?" she asked with a smile. "I'm not a child anymore, Mother," Katya muttered, embarrassed. She laughed and kissed his cheek. "Of course you still are." Katya's face flushed red. He instinctively turned to see if Kiara had noticed. She had. She was smiling at him. He looked away, humiliated and flustered. He was in love with Kiara. He had never said it aloud, not even to himself. No matter what he was doing, herding the reindeer, hunting seals, setting forest traps, Kiara was always on his mind. He adored her slender hands, the way she twirled her golden brown hair around her fingers, the strange little habit she had of sticking her tongue out while concentrating. They were good friends. Talking to her made his heart race. Sitting beside her was the most beautiful feeling in the world. And yet there was the pain. There was Rob. Katya glanced back toward the fire. Rob was still smearing blood across his face like some ancient warrior. He looked powerful, confident, cold. With his chiseled face and muscular frame, Rob seemed untouchable. There was something cruel in his eyes, a quiet threat. He was Kiara's boyfriend. Sometimes Katya saw them holding hands, kissing by the firelight, and it felt like being punched in the gut, a sick, twisting ache in his stomach that he didn't know how to explain. He hated how much it hurt. Sometimes, in darker moments, he even wished he'd never met her. Katya stood up abruptly. He had duties to attend to. He needed to find Oranon and then relieve his father and Ukik from the reindeer camp. His chest felt heavy as he turned away from the firelight. Just before stepping into the shadows, he looked back one last time, at Kiara. And then he was gone, walking toward the edge of the camp where the sled dogs waited, howling softly into the encroaching night. The Neneks were nomadic reindeer herders. Katya's tribe cared for more than 100 reindeer, each animal needing constant attention. The tribe never stayed in one place for long. After a week or two, they would pack up and move the herd to new pastures. The reindeer grazed near the camp, digging through the snow to reach the moss and lichen that grew beneath. In summer, they migrated north into the cold Arctic. In winter, they journeyed south into the deep taiga forests. It had always been this way. Atuktuak and Ukik were currently camping with the herd in a large valley, 5 miles from the main camp. The sled raced beneath the forest canopy. The narrow runners hissed against the damp earth and melting snow, gliding smoothly across the mossy ground. Designed for all terrains, snow, marsh, even dry dirt, this sled was light and fast. At the front ran Blood, a large, one-eyed Siberian husky leading the 6-dog team. He had earned his name and his scar fighting off a brown bear that had wandered into camp. Smokey ran alongside the sled, flanking them like a shadow. Katya scanned the trees. There was little moonlight tonight. The tall pines loomed overhead, cloaking everything in darkness. Shadows pressed in from all sides as the sled tore through the undergrowth. The dogs knew the way. They were trained to navigate dangerous terrain and sense threats, whether from beast or man. Still, Katya stayed alert. His father's words echoed in his mind. "These are dangerous times." "This is no way to live," grumbled Oranon, slouched beside him on the sled. "I was talking to Timothy. He says in America, they have shops bigger than 10 of our campsites put together. If you stand at one end, you can't even see the other." He sat up a little. "And inside, there are thousands of types of food. Just this one thing they have. It's called chips. They fry potatoes in oil, and it comes in hundreds of flavors." Katya nodded. "I've heard of it. Kiara told me." Oranon smacked his lips. "I want to go there." "But things are different there now," Katya said cautiously. Oranon's face darkened. "Yes, if only Tuk had come back from America. Then we'd know for sure what's happening." "But he hasn't come back," Katya muttered, "and that tells us something." Oranon, unwilling to linger on that thought, shifted the subject. "Are you going to get more eggs? They were delicious." "Maybe," Katya replied, a hint of irritation rising. My brother only thinks of food, he thought bitterly. Oranon was an odd sight among Siberian nomads. He was fat, round face, beady eyes, soft body, an anomaly in a land where survival demanded lean muscles and tireless strength. His size was the result of too little labor and too much indulgence. And yet it made him oddly famous. In coastal villages and among neighboring tribes, Oranon was something of a spectacle. Everyone wanted to meet the fat Nenek. Children giggled as they rubbed his belly and tugged on his cheeks. It was said to bring good luck. They left the thick forest behind and crossed onto a wide open plain. Small hills rose all around them, like sleeping beasts. Katya immediately felt better. The moonlight washed over everything, and in the openness, nothing could approach unseen. He smelled the reindeer long before he saw the flicker of a small campfire. A tuk-tuak and ukik were already prepared. Their sleds were loaded, the dogs harnessed and restless. They were waiting impatiently. As Katya and Oranon pulled in, a tuk-tuk stood up. "Don't keep the fire on," he said sharply. "But it's cold," Oranon protested, hugging himself. His father's expression hardened. "Do as I say." Without another word, Ukik screeched a command at the huskies, and their sled shot off into the darkness. Oranon sighed, glancing at the dying fire. "Wolves and bears stay away if we keep it burning." Katya watched the flickering shadows vanish into the night. His father and Ukik were already gone, swallowed by the blackness of the open plain. "It's not animals he's worrying about, brother," Katya said quietly. The brothers lay out in the open, near the reindeer. The animals were calm, tame, and rarely wandered far from the main herd. The dogs had been unharnessed from the sled and had curled up around Katya and Oranon, forming a quiet, watchful circle. Katya stared up at the sky. The stars shimmered brightly above, cold and ancient. He wondered who had placed them there. Are my ancestors really living among them? His thoughts drifted to Kiara. He remembered lying beside her on the ice-hardened ground, both wrapped in silence, gazing at the night sky. He had told her stories of the gods and spirits, of sea princesses and krakens, of the first Neneks who now lived among the stars. That had been over a year ago, before he had fallen in love with her. Back then, she had simply been his closest, and perhaps only friend. But everything had changed since then. Everything was complicated now. A distant wolf howled. The dogs stirred, ears twitching. Katya sat up. He had to make regular rounds through the night, checking on the reindeer. Wolves, bears, and even wild reindeer posed a threat, sometimes luring the herd away. Oranon, of course, was no help. He was already asleep, snoring softly. A large Eurasian eagle owl swooped by, wings brushing the air near Katya's face as it searched for prey. Katya rose slowly and gave a sharp whistle. Smoky and Blood immediately stood up. The night was bitterly cold. He pulled his thick reindeer fur coat tighter around him. Above, thick black clouds had swallowed the stars. The sky now hung like a curtain of shadows. Only a faint trace of moonlight escaped through the seams. Then a thought crept into his mind. What if it comes tonight? A chill far colder than the wind ran through him. The cold hand of fear touched his spine. He licked his dry lips. The forest around him was still, too still. Though spring had arrived, the night was unnaturally quiet. Katya inhaled deeply. He reached down, drew the small dagger he always carried, and stepped forward into the blackness, Smoky and Blood silently following behind. If it comes, I'll fight it. Chapter 2. The old Cambridge School in Woodside, California, was considered one of the hardest schools to get into in America. Its rigorous curriculum, expansive extracurriculars, dedicated community outreach, and all-round approach to education made its students some of the finest in the country. The teachers and advisors the school employed were the best money could buy. Among its most prestigious programs was the Spring Alaskan Expedition, a month-long academic voyage. The class took place aboard a chartered ship bound for the Arctic, where subjects like natural history, biology, and climate change were taught in the field. That year, the school had commissioned the Queen Isabella, a small but luxurious passenger vessel. There were 45 students and 8 teachers on board. Kiara tossed and turned on her reindeer fur mat. It had been 2 years since that fateful day she first stepped onto the ship. She had been so excited back then, eager to see the Arctic, unaware of what was to come. Her worries had been typical: good grades, choosing the right Ivy League college, teenage boyfriend drama. Now her main concern was survival. The memories refused to fade. The more she tried to bury them, the sharper they became. She remembered her first few days at sea, standing on the deck during golden Arctic sunsets, surrounded by endless ocean. Dolphins had followed the ship, and she had felt strangely moved by the beauty and vastness around her. Back then, she had felt grateful, inspired. She had wanted to make a difference in the world. And then the horror began. Just a few days into the journey, strange reports reached them of a possible pandemic spreading from Alaska. The Queen Isabella was deep in the Gulf of Alaska when all communication with the mainland abruptly ceased. The final radio transmission from Anchorage was chilling. An epidemic was exploding across the country. They were warned to remain at sea. Then, nothing. Silence. The radio went dead. Panic spread through the ship. Students couldn't reach their families. The high-speed satellite internet stopped working. Cell phone service vanished. They were completely cut off. Martin Stoppard, a tenured British professor from Oxford University, had joined the expedition as an educational consultant. The Arctic trip had been his brainchild. A stern disciplinarian, he demanded excellence from his students. But when the crisis began, he stepped forward as a leader. He guided the group through those uncertain days while they remained anchored offshore, desperate for news. He had comforted Kiara and her friends. Back then, she had been grateful he was with them. But now he was no longer the same man. Kiara had watched his transformation with dread. These days, he looked at her with something predatory in his eyes. He snapped at the students. He bullied the weak. He acted like a madman. And now he walked around with streaks of blood painted on his face like war paint. Who in their right mind would smear blood on themselves? She had read about piblocto, Arctic hysteria, an illness that sometimes affected Inuit communities. It made people behave irrationally, even violently. It was a kind of madness brought on by isolation and extreme cold. Is that what happened to him, she wondered? Is he going insane? From the stranded ship, they had studied the coastline for days, but it was eerily quiet. No ships, no traffic, no people. The harbor was shut down. Roads and highways lay empty. It was as if the entire world had vanished. Only at night would they see movement, shadows in the dark, strange figures that would disappear before morning. After a week, a few crew members volunteered to take a small boat to investigate the harbor. They never came back. Fuel on the Queen Isabella was running dangerously low. Then, through crackling static, the captain heard transmissions from Russian sea traffic. They were still operating. The decision was made to attempt a desperate run across the Pacific to Petropavlovsk, a port city in far eastern Russia. The hope was to refuel and find answers. But just 2 hours from landfall, contact with the Russians ceased. Then came the storm. It was a brutal Arctic tempest, a nightmare of wind and waves. The ship lost power and drifted helplessly over the massive swells. Small icebergs near the coast slammed repeatedly into the hull, causing the vessel to tilt sharply. It was the most terrifying experience of Kiara's life. Water flooded the lower decks. The ship rose and fell like a toy in the monstrous sea. Furniture crashed from side to side. Emergency sirens screamed. Passengers ran, shouted, wept. With every wave, water surged inside. Panic turned to chaos. Kiara watched, helpless, as some of her friends were swept away into the icy, raging waters, screaming, reaching out, then gone. The ship had lost half its crew when they left to investigate the harbor in Alaska. The remaining members, frantic and exhausted, were unable to deploy all the lifeboats in time. Only 21 people managed to get into 2 of them. One lifeboat crashed against a jagged outcrop near the coast, shattering on impact and killing everyone aboard. Just 7 people in the other boat survived. Kiara had crawled out of that lifeboat in a daze. She found herself on a frozen, lifeless landscape under a pale gray sky, the bitter cold seeping through her soaked clothes. The survivors, helpless, cold, and wet, huddled together, their teeth chattering uncontrollably. There was no sign of life anywhere. They had been too weak to secure the lifeboat, and it had drifted back out to sea, along with their food rations. The storm had passed, but brutal Arctic winds still swept across the land. They were starving, freezing, and on the verge of death. As Kiara lay on the ice, she felt herself slipping into a quiet, painless sleep. Her body was shutting down. That was when she saw it, a dark shape moving on the horizon. It was coming closer. A large wolf. Her heart clenched. Is this how it ends? She thought, overcome with regret. Tears welled up and ran down her cheeks. She shut her eyes tightly. She could smell the animal as it approached. It sniffed her face. That was the last thing she remembered. Then only blackness. Later she understood. It hadn't been a wolf at all. It was a big black dog. It had found them and led the tribe to the shore. Smokey had saved their lives. Do you see? See what, grandfather? Do you see? Yes, grandfather. Do you see? Katya jolted awake. Oranon was leaning over him, shaking his shoulder. He looked around, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. He was back inside the warmth of his baylock. The evening sun slanted in through the small opening, casting a golden glow across the floor. He and Oranon had returned with the reindeer that morning. Since then, he had corralled them, chopped wood for the tribe, and set the forest traps. He was exhausted. He'd only been asleep a couple of hours before Oranon woke him. What? Katya grumbled. I have to show you something, said Oranon, eyes gleaming. Katya closed his eyes again. I don't want to see it. It's Kiara, Oranon whispered. Katya sat up instantly, all fatigue gone. What about her? Oranon smirked and tiptoed toward the entrance of the baylock. He peeked out, then motioned for Katya to follow. Come, but we have to stay hidden. Katya followed his brother along a narrow trail through the forest, confused. Oranon refused to say another word. Katya noticed Smokey wasn't with them. The dog usually gave him a sense of protection, a quiet courage. She must have wandered off into the forest again. They reached the edge of the pines. Oranon crouched low and darted to a small mud bank that sloped gently down to the river. Katya followed, curious and uneasy. He could hear faint shrieks of laughter in the distance. The bank was screened by a thick wall of bilberry bushes. Oranon parted the leaves. They both looked through. Katya's breath caught in his throat. There, in the shallow water, were Kiara and Rob, laughing, splashing, completely naked. Oranon grinned. Look at her body. Katya felt a surge of shame. What were they doing? Spying on her like this? He knew it was wrong. He wanted to look away, but couldn't. Kiara stepped out of the river, shivering. His heart thudded painfully in his chest as he stared at her lithe, dripping figure, her small, perfect breasts, her long, graceful legs. Rob ran after her and grabbed her from behind, lifting her playfully and dragging her back into the water. They were both laughing, lost in their own world. Katya's stomach twisted. A strange cocktail of emotions surged through him: envy, fury, despair, and deeper still, something raw and electric. He was so entranced he didn't hear the person approaching. Only when a footstep landed directly behind him did he realize they weren't alone. He spun around, cursing himself for his carelessness. It was the professor. The man stood over them, eyes narrow, fists clenched. What are you two doing here? He demanded. Nothing, Oranon replied, voice trembling. Laughter echoed from the river. Spying, are we? The professor said through gritted teeth. No, Oranon stammered. The professor leaned forward and peered through the bush. His mouth opened slightly in surprise. Kiara? Katya turned his gaze to the professor and froze. Something had changed in the man's expression. He saw it in his eyes, not curiosity, not recognition. It was something darker, something hungry. It was lust. The professor turned to the boys. How dare you? We just... began Oranon, but the professor suddenly punched him on the face. It wasn't a hard hit, but Oranon lost his balance and collapsed to the ground, stunned, holding his face. Please, please, he mumbled, shocked, as the professor advanced on him with clenched fists. I'm going to teach you a lesson, the professor hissed. Katya stepped between them, instinctively drawing his dagger. The professor halted. Katya stared at him like a cornered animal, his body half crouched, ready to spring. His eyes were locked on the man's, cold and unblinking. The professor glowered back, but then looked away. Katya knew he had won. The professor exhaled heavily and stepped back. "Let's go," Katya said, offering a hand to Oranon, who got up and dusted off his clothes. They turned and walked away from the mud bank in silence. At the edge of the forest, Katya glanced back. The professor was lying behind the bushes, hidden, still watching the river. Oranon rubbed his face, grimacing in pain. Katya bent down, packed a ball of snow, and handed it to him. "Put the snow on your face. It's better not to leave a mark." "What do you mean?" asked Oranon, surprised. Katya shrugged. "Or else there might be trouble." "That's good," Oranon growled. "Father will teach that monster a lesson." "We're not strong, brother. There's only Father and Ukik. Until Tuk and the men return, we have to be careful." Oranon grunted. "So we do nothing?" "Only for a little while. Please." "Fine, brother," Oranon sighed. "But mark my words, he will attack us again." "He won't," Katya said, trying to convince himself. But deep inside, he knew Oranon was right. Things were about to get much worse. Over the next few days, Katya and Oranon kept their distance from the professor. Katya also avoided Kiara. He was ashamed, guilty of spying on her, too embarrassed to meet her eyes. But he was also angry, though he had no right to be. She had always been kind to him, and Rob had been her boyfriend even before Katya had ever met her. He was crouched near the tree line, setting a forest trap, when he saw Rob and Mark returning from the river along a narrow trail. Their faces were smeared with blood and mud. When they spotted him, they turned off the path and pushed through the undergrowth toward him. Mark smirked. "How's it going, little savage boy?" Katya ignored them, focused on the notch he was carving into a tree stump for the deadfall trap. "He's a moody one," said Rob. Katya made sure to keep them in his line of sight. He didn't trust them. He had seen them bullying Lillian and Timothy. Until now, they had mostly left tribe members alone. But that seemed to be changing. "He's an ugly little monster, isn't he?" Mark sneered. "What do you want?" Katya asked without looking up. "It's not what I want," Rob said. "It's what you want." Katya kept working. "Find someone else to trouble. You know I'm not afraid of you." "Don't count on that. We're bigger than you," Mark hissed. Katya glanced up with disdain. "But not stronger, not faster. I see fear in your eyes when you look at me." Mark spat on the ground. "That's because you've got a knife in your hand." Katya stood up slowly. He dropped the knife he'd been using for the trap and took a step toward Mark. He looked him dead in the eye. "No," Katya said softly. "It's not the knife." "I was saying," Rob cut in, his voice venomous, "that I know what you want." "And what do I want?" Katya asked. "Kiara," Rob whispered. Katya blinked. "No, I—" How did he know? That secret had never left his chest. Not even Kiara knew. "Yes, you want her. I can see it. I know you were spying on us. The professor told me. You saw her naked, and now you can't forget her beautiful body. You want to fuck her, don't you?" "No, no," Katya protested. "It's not like that." But inside, his thoughts raced. Is that what this is about? Do I want her like that? "Well, you can never have her," Rob said smugly. "And do you know why?" Katya stayed silent. "It's because of how you look," Rob continued. "You're ugly. You've got darkish skin, those weird mongoloid features. Your eyes aren't fully round. It's like—" Rob paused, searching for the right words. "The slit eyes of a snake," said Mark. "Exactly. And look at your nose. It's stubbed," Rob continued, his eyes gleaming with hate. "Your lips are too big and you're too short. Now look at me. Look at my features. I have perfect white skin and blue eyes just like her. I'm a good-looking guy and she's a good-looking girl. That's why I fuck her, and she loves it. She just can't get enough of it. You want to know all the things I do to her?" Katya looked down, staring at his feet. The fight had drained from him. A deep, powerful shame began to rise in his chest. It's true. She's not meant for me. What was I even thinking? Rob could see it, the way Katya was shrinking. It pleased him. He smirked. "She'll never go for someone like you. Sure, she's polite. She might even talk to you. But you're just too unattractive for her." Katya had never thought about the way he looked. Really thought about it. He knew the tribe didn't have the sharp, pale features of the White Russians. His ancestors came from Central Asia. All his life, his mother had told him he was a beautiful boy. She couldn't have been more wrong. Tears welled up in Katya's eyes. Mark chuckled. "Ah, look at him, crying like a little girl. Not so tough now, are we?" Rob and Mark exchanged satisfied glances. "You stay with your people," Rob said coldly, "and we'll stay with ours." They walked away toward the forest path, leaving silence behind them. Katya sat down, leaning against a pine tree. He wiped his tears with the back of his hand. His cheeks burned. This had been the most humiliating moment of his life. The professor turned the kaleidoscope in his hands. It was beautifully crafted, engraved with intricate Bedouin patterns and scrolling Arabic calligraphy. A gift from a student many years ago. He had kept it safely, a relic from a past life, a link to all he had once loved. But that life was meaningless now. "I am not that man anymore. I am a warrior. I survive in the wild. I am a hunter, and I am a killer. I drink the blood of my enemies and eat their flesh." The kaleidoscope no longer held any significance for him. That was why he was going to give it away. He sat on a fallen tree trunk outside his baylock, watching the midday activity of the camp. The men were tending to the reindeer. The women were cooking, washing clothes, scrubbing tools. Children played with pine cones and stones, laughing and shrieking with joy. If he were in charge of the tribe, things would be different, more disciplined, more efficient. No time wasted. He would change these savages. He would better them. The time would come soon, he thought. Very soon. His eyes scanned the camp until they rested on Upu. The little girl was talking to her doll, a crude thing made of dried leaves and wood, tied together with sinew, away from the other children. She sat alone, absorbed in her imaginary world. He studied her. Yes, she would do. A familiar stirring awakened deep inside him. He had always liked children. He was aroused by them. Of course, he had never acted on those impulses. Not back in the old world. Back then, he had a family, a reputation. The risk had been too great. But here was different. Here, he was free. This is a new world. I will make the rules now. What if this was who he truly was? Shouldn't a man be true to his nature? Right and wrong? Those are inventions, lies. The ancient Greeks, at the height of their glory, had understood this. They had honored love in all forms. They believed that only consent mattered in carnal relations, not age. Modern morality had twisted that truth, but he would correct it. He would build the perfect society, and this tribe, these forgotten people, would become his test subjects, his experiment, his new civilization. He had already thought it all out. The grand social experiment was ready to begin. He stared at Upu. Such a sweet little thing. Her mother, Arnak, was nearby, scrubbing the outer walls of their baylock with a brush made of raven-wing feathers. He waited, watching patiently. When Arnak finally disappeared inside the home, he whistled softly. Upu looked up. He motioned her over. She hesitated, then stood. Doll in hand, she began walking toward him, small and unsure, her eyes shy but curious. The professor slowly pulled the kaleidoscope from under his jacket. Her eyes widened as she stared at the beautiful object, transfixed by its strange and delicate beauty. "Look inside," he said, raising it toward the light. Upu peered through one end. A dazzling, brightly colored pattern burst into view. She gasped, astonished. She had never seen anything like it in her life. The professor gently pulled the kaleidoscope away. "Do you want this?" he asked, his voice sly and coaxing. "Yes, yes," she said eagerly, eyes still shining. "I want something in return." "What?" "The large knife your mother uses." Upu hesitated. "But she needs it for her work." "I know she has 2 knives," the professor said sweetly. "She won't miss one." Upu frowned. "But why do you want the knife?" The professor forced a smile. "Why do you want this toy?" "She's not as stupid as I thought." "To play with it," Upu replied. The professor shrugged. "And I want to play with the knife." He held out the kaleidoscope again. She bit her lip, thinking hard. He leaned in and whispered, "And this has to be our secret. No one can know." Upu knew what she would have to do, steal the knife from her mother. It would be wrong. She also sensed that giving the professor a knife might be dangerous. There was something strange about him, something dark. But the gleaming lights inside the toy, they were so beautiful. She made up her mind. "Okay," she said softly. "I'll get you the knife." It was late at night when Katya returned to camp. The settlement was quiet. Everyone seemed to be asleep. He had spent the entire day with the reindeer herd and was exhausted. Walking over to a large vessel suspended above a gently smoldering fire, he ladled some warm reindeer soup into a small pot. Then he cut strips from a frozen fish and added them to the broth. He sat down and ate quietly, staring into the glowing embers. Smokey, his dog, had returned from her wandering and ran circles around him before nibbling playfully at his leg. Hungry, Katya devoured the soup quickly. A figure emerged from the shadows. It was his mother Arnak, stepping out of their baylock. She walked over to where he sat. "Why are you not sleeping?" Katya asked. Arnak began stirring the fire. "Bad dream," she murmured. "About what?" "I don't remember now," she said quietly. Katya tossed a few bones to Smokey. Arnak studied him closely. "What's wrong?" she asked. "Nothing," Katya replied too quickly. Arnak narrowed her eyes. "What is it, Katya?" He hesitated. "Why don't we look like the other Russians?" "Which Russians?" "The ones from the big cities." "Why are you asking me this?" He shrugged. "I was just thinking." Arnak turned to him, her voice calm but steady. "We came from mountains far south of these lands hundreds of years ago." "I wish I didn't look like this," Katya said quietly. His mother looked at him, her expression sharpening. "What happened?" Katya stared into the fire, ashamed. He couldn't bring himself to look at her. The words felt heavy, difficult. "Rob told me I was ugly. He said awful things about how I look. Things I'd never thought of before. I don't understand why he hates me." "Oh, child, don't you see?" his mother said softly. "It's obvious." "What is? What did I ever do to him?" Katya asked gloomily. "It's not what you did." He looked up, confused. "Then what?" "It's the girl," she said. Katya blinked. "Kiara?" His mother smiled gently. "She likes you, and he knows it." Chapter 3. The boats were made of seal and walrus skin, light, durable, and swift on the cold water. Katya and Ukik paddled the first boat, muscles steady and rhythmic. His father stood tall at the stern, scanning the vast sea with a pair of binoculars, his eyes sweeping the shimmering horizon. It was a beautiful day. The sun blazed high, and the glare bouncing off the ice was nearly blinding. Katya inhaled deeply. The crisp sea breeze filled his lungs. It felt good to be out on the water. Of course, it would have been even better if the professor and his group had stayed on land. Katya glanced back at the boat following them. The professor was perched forward, eyes gleaming with anticipation as he searched eagerly for their prey. Rob and Mark were paddling, their strokes slightly out of sync, while Elvis lounged lazily, skimming his hand through the frigid surface. Two boats made the hunt easier, and a tuk-tuak had reluctantly given the professor permission to join. Oranon had pleaded sickness, but everyone knew the truth. He couldn't bear to see blood, and today's hunt would be a bloody one. Katya had been cautious, steering the boat between thick, floating slabs of ice. If the boat got trapped, it could easily be crushed. Suddenly, his father stiffened. He pointed ahead silently. In the distance, a misty cloud rose above the water. A spray. A sign. Katya and Ukik dug their paddles harder into the sea. They were in pursuit of a walrus. The professor's boat picked up speed to keep pace. A tuk-tuak double-checked the harpoon lines, each connected to a large buoy designed to prevent a deep dive. The walrus in question was massive, a full-grown male easily weighing close to 2,000 pounds. It lay resting on an ice floe, snorting and grunting, clearly alerted to their presence. Katya steered the boat in a wide semicircle, trying to block off its escape route into deeper water. His father signaled to the professor's boat, "Drive it toward them." The walrus made its move, hauling its bulk off the ice and splashing heavily into the sea. Katya and Ukik paddled furiously, closing in. When they were within a dozen feet, a tuk-tuak stood, harpoon raised. He waited. Then with practiced precision, he launched it. The harpoon pierced the walrus's thick back. It bellowed in pain and surged forward, but the buoy held, preventing it from diving. A cheer rose from the other boat. The water darkened. Red ripples spread rapidly across the surface. A Tuktuak readied his rifle. The walrus surfaced again, thrashing and shrieking. A Tuktuak aimed and fired. The bullet struck its skull. The huge beast stilled. "Let it suffer," Mark spat from the other boat, smirking. Katya and Ukik exchanged uneasy glances. Katya looked over at the professor's group. Their eyes sparkled, not with relief or reverence, but a twisted, gleeful mania. There was something wrong in the way they savored the violence. The walrus was roped and tethered to both boats. Together, they towed the carcass toward the rocky beach. Hauling the massive animal out of the water and up the slick rocks was exhausting work. Smoky Katya's dog darted along the shoreline, barking and wagging its tail, frenzied by the smell of blood. The professor's group was getting ready to leave. Their faces were smeared with walrus blood and crude war paint. They looked triumphant, almost savage. "It would have helped if my group also had a gun," the professor said to Atuktuak. Katya stiffened. "What is he planning?" "One gun was enough for the hunt," said Atuktuak without emotion. "It's not fair," the professor said bitterly. "Don't you trust us?" "Every bullet is valuable," Atuktuak replied calmly. "We can hunt well enough with one gun." "It's not just for hunting. There's the matter of protection. My group will feel safer if we are allowed to keep a gun. We'll only use it in emergencies. I know there are 2 guns in the camp. You keep one. I keep one." Katya blinked. How did the professor know about the second gun? It was hidden away safely, locked with other valuables in a storage box inside his mother's baylock. "No," said his father firmly. "You refuse my friendship constantly," the professor muttered. "You're a suspicious man." "I have nothing more to say." The professor's group turned and left, grumbling among themselves, casting dark glances at Atuktuak. "He grows more forward every day," said Ukik quietly. Atuktuak watched them walk away, then turned to Katya. "Get the women. We need to skin and cut the walrus." Katya was about to return to the shore with his mother and the other women when Upu came running toward him. "We've trapped a sable on the south side snare. We have to take it out before the wolves get to it," she said, her voice tight with worry. The trap was a long walk from the camp. Katya sighed. "Don't you know how to work a trap?" "No, you promised to teach me, but you didn't." "How do you know there's a sable caught in it?" "I saw it." "You shouldn't be going that far from camp, Upu." "It's not safe," Katya said, frowning. "Blood was with me." "Still." He glanced toward the beach. He would retrieve the sable first, and then join his parents for the walrus. "Let's go," he told his sister. "I'll teach you how to use a trap." They walked together along a mossy forest path, the dogs, Smoky and Blood, padding behind them. Katya looked up at the towering pine trees. This part of the forest was ancient. The trees stretched more than 150 feet into the sky. They were said to have healing powers, able to cure the sick and wounded. Katya wondered if there was any truth to that. "Mother said these trees are 500 years old," Upu said, looking up. "Yes," Katya replied quietly. He suddenly stopped. The dogs had frozen, ears pricked, bodies tense, growling softly. Katya listened closely. Somewhere in the distance, a low, strange rumble echoed through the forest. The dogs bolted into the undergrowth, weaving through shrubs toward the sound. "Stay close to me," Katya ordered, and took off behind them. The rumbling grew louder as they ran. The trail rose gently, leading to a hill that overlooked a large forest clearing. From the top, they looked down. There in the clearing were the professor, Rob, Mark, and Elvis. They stood in a circle, faces streaked with blood, chanting in eerie unison, "I am a warrior. I survive in the wild. I am a hunter and I am a killer. I drink the blood of my enemies and eat their flesh. I am a warrior. I survive in the wild. I am a hunter and I am a killer. I drink the blood of my enemies and eat their flesh." "Quiet," Upu whispered, holding the growling dog still. They crouched low in the brushwood, watching in silence. In the center of the clearing stood an effigy, crudely shaped from reindeer fur and twisted branches. After the chanting stopped, the group lifted their weapons and began throwing them at the effigy. The weapons were makeshift spears, long birch branches sharpened to deadly points. Each throw was powerful and precise. They could kill a man with ease. How long had they been practicing? Where had they made these weapons? Katya's eyes narrowed as he spotted something glinting in the professor's hand. A large knife. So that was how. He had stolen a knife from the tribe. "This is not good," Katya muttered anxiously. "Let's go." He turned to Upu. She looked shaken, biting her lip nervously. "Don't worry," he said, trying to reassure her. "They can't do us any harm." Upu nodded and followed him away from the hill, her steps slow, her face tight with dread. Something gnawed at her from the inside. What have I done, she wondered. Should I tell Katya? No. He'll be angry. He'll scold me. So this was why the professor had wanted the knife. She hadn't understood before. Now she did. She glanced over her shoulder one last time, then bowed her head and whispered a silent prayer to the gods, begging them to forgive her. Katya told Upu to keep what they had seen a secret. First, he would speak to his father. There was no point in spreading panic through the camp until he knew what to do. He wondered what the tribe's response would be. Already the seeds of discord were taking root. If we have to survive in the world of the man-eaters, he thought, we have to learn to live together. He went down to the shore and joined the others in cutting up the walrus. The meat was packed into bags made from the animal's own skin and hauled back to camp. Atuktuak immediately left to check on the reindeer herd. He didn't return until late evening, when everyone had gathered around the fire, eating chunks of roasted walrus meat. Katya noticed that Upu was still troubled. She had barely touched her food. The professor and his group were in high spirits. They talked loudly, laughing and joking among themselves. Katya noticed Kiara sitting close to Rob, his arm wrapped comfortably around her waist. Atuktuak stood and raised both hands, signaling for silence. The camp quieted. In a week, he announced, we will begin our great journey to the tundra. There was applause from the tribe. The start of the annual migration north was always considered a sacred time. They had stored enough dried fish and seal meat for the long trek ahead. But then the professor narrowed his eyes. No. A stunned silence fell. No one ever questioned Atuktuak's decisions. He was the chieftain. His word was final. Katya looked at the professor, bewildered. The journey north had taken place every year for as long as anyone could remember. How could this outsider object? The professor chewed slowly on his meat, savoring the attention. Human beings are not meant to live a nomadic life, he said with a smug smile. Progress happens when people settle. This place has food. We should build a permanent settlement here. Atuktuak studied him for a long moment. There won't be food here after spring, he replied steadily. The birds and seals will migrate. The reindeer need to move to survive. Anyone from your group who wishes to remain is welcome. But the tribe moves in a week. The professor's expression darkened. He knew his group would struggle to survive without the rest of the tribe. I speak for the tribe, he said defiantly. If I settle here, I want everyone to stay. That is not going to happen, Atuktuak replied, calm and firm. This is not a wise decision, the professor spat, his voice laced with contempt. Atuktuak remained unmoved. We will do what our ancestors have done. The professor's tone sharpened. It's foolish. I have better ideas for our people. Without a word, Atuktuak stepped forward. He crouched down directly in front of the professor, their faces just inches apart. Katya tensed. His hand drifted to the sheathed dagger at his side. He watched the two men, their eyes locked in a silent battle. The professor tried to look unbothered, but Katya saw through him. He was rattled. Atuktuak was a large man, built solid, with the presence of someone born to lead. He carried power with quiet certainty. He had led the tribe through storms, blizzards, hunger, and joy. It would take more than an arrogant former teacher to shake him. In that moment, Katya suddenly realized how much he loved his father and how proud he was of him. The professor leaned back, cleared his throat, searching for words. But nothing came. You've forgotten where you are, Atuktuak said softly. This is not your world. It never will be. Katya lay on his fur mat near the still-blazing campfire, staring up at the stars. He hated sleeping inside the crowded baylocks. Out here, under the open sky, Even in sub-zero temperatures, he felt more at peace. The dogs had been unchained for the night and roamed freely, barking, playing, and occasionally fighting. But sleep wouldn't come. His thoughts kept drifting to the weapons. What were they planning? What were they scheming? Perhaps the professor's group was simply preparing for the man-eaters. But in his gut, Katya knew that wasn't it. The professor had something else in mind. He stood and wandered toward the edge of the camp. Smokey lazily followed. The moon was shining brightly overhead, casting a pale glow on the undulating pine forests, stretching endlessly into the distance. Life was so simple before, Katya thought. The only enemy we had was the cold. He noticed a thick stake, embedded long ago into a stunted tree to hang ropes on, had snapped. As he knelt to fix it, he heard soft footsteps behind him. He didn't turn. He already knew who it was. His heart began to race. He kept working, pretending not to notice. "Why don't you talk to me anymore?" Kiara's voice was soft but direct. Katya looked up. She wore a light dress, her hair dancing in the strong night breeze. She looked so pretty. Ever since the river, he had avoided her. Was it guilt? Was it anger? "I know she will never be mine." And then there was everything Rob had told him. He forced a smile. "Aren't you cold?" "A little," Kiara replied. "So why are you not talking to me?" "There's just so much work," Katya said. She stepped closer and looked at him, eyes searching. Then gently, she ran her fingers along his cheek. "You have a little beard," she grinned. "You're no longer a boy." Katya laughed, rubbing his face. "Good." Kiara turned to glance back at the camp. "Things are getting bad." "I know. I feel it," Katya said quietly. "They trouble Lillian and Timothy a lot," she sighed. Katya's eyes narrowed. "What do?" "They order them around, fetch water, bring food. If they refuse, the professor gets furious. Lillian and Timothy are constantly bullied." "Maybe," said Katya, "you could talk to—" "I'm not talking to the professor," she snapped before he could finish. "He's going to go crazy." "No, I meant Rob." Even saying the name made Katya uneasy. "I tried. We fight about it all the time," said Kiara. They sat down on the ground shoulder to shoulder. Kiara took his hand. "This place is so beautiful," she murmured. "It is," Katya replied, his mind spinning. Should I tell her I love her? If ever there was a perfect time, this was it. Holding hands in the moonlight, away from everyone. But what if she said no? What if it ruined everything? What if Rob had been right about him? Smokey squeezed between them, nuzzling Kiara and trying to lick her face. She laughed. "Stop." "She likes you," Katya said. "And I like her." "She knows you have a good heart." Kiara smiled and ran her fingers through the big dog's fur. Smokey rolled onto her back, enjoying the attention. "Are you going to marry him?" Katya asked suddenly. Kiara looked at him, surprised. No, I don't think so." "So it's not love?" She shook her head. "No." "Then why do you sleep together?" he asked, a slight edge to his voice. "I don't want to talk about it," she said, her expression turning uncomfortable. "Sorry I asked," Katya said, standing. "It's late. I need to sleep." Kiara hesitated. I've lost everything, Katya. All my friends. My mom. My dad. My sister. My home. I don't even know if they're alive." Her voice broke. She took a deep breath, gathering herself. "It's comfort, I suppose." Katya crouched, playing with a twig, his thoughts circling. "And pleasure," she added after a moment. "But not happiness," he said quietly. Kiara looked up at the stars. "No, not happiness." Chapter 4. It was a scream that woke Katya. He sat up on his mat, startled. It was early morning, and the camp was just beginning to stir. Yellowish-orange sunlight gently seeped through the heavy mist around him. Beside him, the campfire had died out. For a moment, he wondered if the scream had only been a dream. But then he heard the dogs growling, and there it was again. A distant scream, piercing the silence. It had come from the hillside near the camp. Katya grabbed his dagger and sprinted toward the sound. It had sounded like a girl's voice. Was it Kiara? He tore through thorn bushes and cranberry shrubs, racing up the hill, heart pounding. At the top, he saw Lillian standing perfectly still, staring down at the ground. She was at the forest's edge, on a narrow track that led toward the river. "What happened?" Katya asked, breathless. Lillian pointed silently at the path. There, on a small patch of snow, was the clearly defined imprint of a man's bare foot. Around it were tiny drops of blood. Katya crouched down, examining the mark. Though spring had arrived, it was still bitterly cold. No one in their right mind would walk barefoot out here, certainly not this far from camp. Frostbite would set in within minutes. Could it be a wanderer? Someone lost? It was possible, but deeply unlikely. They hadn't seen another human being in over 2 years. And everyone knew the man-eaters walked barefoot. "The monsters have come," Lillian whispered, clutching Katya's hand. Behind him, others had started to arrive. Panic rippled through the crowd. Timothy made the sign of the cross and began to pray. A woman from the tribe wept softly. Children huddled together, wide-eyed, staring at the bloody print. Have the man-eaters finally arrived? Katya scanned the surrounding hills and forests. Where is it? Where's the creature? He circled the footprint, trying to see if the trail led to or away from the camp. But there was nothing. No other tracks. Just the single chilling imprint. Arnak raised her voice, calm but commanding. "Let us go back to camp. We have to make sure everyone is safe." Her authority brought some order to the group. They returned together, murmuring nervously. Katya caught fragments of whispered questions. Who was it? Was it the man-eater? What would happen now? Could they fight it? Were there more of them? Back at the camp, they checked to make sure everyone was accounted for. All the high school group members were present. Atuktok and Ukik were with the reindeer and expected back any minute. Oranon was there. All the women were safe. The children were safe. All except Upu. Katya's stomach dropped. Fear surged through him. "Please don't let anything happen to my sister," he prayed. Arnak looked stunned. "But she was with me, sleeping inside the baylock when I heard the scream." "Where did she go?" Katya whistled for Smokey. "I'm going to search for her," he said, voice tight with anxiety. "So am I," his mother said. "Let's organize search parties," shouted the professor. "Everyone, scout around the camp. See if you find anything. We're looking for the creature and the girl." Katya noticed the eagerness in the professor's voice. For a moment, he felt guilty for doubting the man so much. Maybe he's not such a bad person. Was I wrong about him all along? Katya first checked the dogs. One was missing. Blood. A wave of relief hit him. Upu always took blood with her when she wandered into the forest. The dog would protect her. But would it be enough against a man-eater? With dagger in hand, Katya plunged into the trees. Mist coiled around the forest floor, muffling sound and obscuring vision. He couldn't see more than 8 feet in any direction. Every twig snap, every rustle made his heart leap. In the distance, he heard Ukik shouting at his sled dogs. That meant his father had returned. Good, Katya thought. He'll search for Upu too. He remembered what he had once told his sister. Father will never let anything happen to you. Now he could only hope those words would hold true. Upu! Katya shouted as he walked through the thick, grassy undergrowth. Despite the morning chill, he had rolled down the hood of his fur coat. He needed to listen. The forest spoke in whispers, and he couldn't afford to miss a single sound. He scanned the ground around him for any trace of her passage. But the infernal mist made it nearly impossible. She could be lying injured just a dozen feet away, and he wouldn't even know. The forest was silent, eerily so. Smokey darted ahead, sniffing around the wet foliage. Katya had already walked at least a mile from the camp. He knew that in another hour or two, the mist would begin to lift and visibility would improve. Where could she be? His mother had seen her in the morning, right after Lillian had screamed. So she had been safe at that point. But now, a twig snapped. Katya froze. There was someone, or something nearby. Smokey stiffened too, alert and ready. She looked at Katya for instructions. He motioned her forward. She obeyed eagerly, following the scent. Katya realized he was downwind. Whatever was out there couldn't smell him. That gave him an advantage. Together they crept toward the sound. Smokey whined softly with excitement. She guided him forward. But if it was the man-eater, what could he possibly do? Fight a monster with only a dagger? Upu could be hurt. I have to save her. I have to fight the creature. Through the shifting mist, he saw a figure. It was leaning against a tree, his breath caught in his throat. It was large, massive even, maybe 7 feet tall. He moved closer. The figure grunted. Then the mist parted just enough, and Katya saw it clearly. A brown bear, clawing at the bark of a pine tree. The bear turned and saw Smokey. It growled ferociously. "Back, Smokey!" Katya shouted. But Smokey was too excited. She darted around the bear like a wolf, nipping and leaping away just before its huge paws could strike. "Back!" Katya yelled again. He grabbed pine cones from the ground and hurled them at the bear with all his strength. 1, 2, 3. The repeated hits startled the animal. With a final snarl, the bear lumbered away into the mist. Smokey desperately wanted to chase the bear. Katya grabbed her by the neck. "No!" he commanded. She whined in protest, ears twitching, sniffing the air. "Can't you obey?" Katya scolded her, heart pounding. He sat down, trying to catch his breath. The forest had gone still again, and that's when it struck him. Something that had been quietly gnawing at the back of his mind ever since morning. He had ignored it in his desperation to find Upu. But now, sitting there among the trees, it became clear. The dogs, their behavior had been off. Smokey had been there when he saw the footprint. She had sniffed it, but then lost all interest. If she had sensed a strange or threatening scent, she would have bolted after it. Instead, she had wandered around like it meant nothing. The other dogs had been quiet too. Whenever a wild animal approached the camp, they would go into a frenzy of barking. They were hunting dogs, bred to stalk, to defend, to alert. But this morning, nothing, silence. Then there was the footprint itself. Too perfect. Every toe cleanly visible, not smudged or half frozen like you'd expect from natural movement. And the blood, it looked placed, as if someone had carefully dripped it onto the snow around the print. Not spilled, not smeared, deliberate. Katya stood up, his mind racing. That was it. It wasn't a man-eater. Someone had made that footprint. But why? To distract the camp? To take Upu? Whatever the plan was, it had nothing to do with monsters. The enemy isn't outside, he realized. It's within. He had been looking in the wrong direction. It all made sense now. "Can you see?" his grandfather used to ask him when he was little. "Do you understand, child?" Katya looked at the swirling mist around him. "Yes, grandfather," he said softly, as if speaking to a ghost. "I can see." And now he knew. There was only one person in the entire camp clever enough, manipulative enough, and bold enough to stage something like this. The footprint, the blood, the disappearance. It was all part of a plan, a trap, a lie. He had to find the professor, and he had to find him now. Chapter 5. Everything had gone exactly as he had planned. The professor stood near the river ford, the designated meeting point, watching the morning sun rise over the distant hills. Today he would become the leader of the tribe. He had been waiting for this moment for a long, long time. He saw the boys running toward him. Rob, Mark, and Elvis splashed across the shallow river and reached him panting. "He's searching along the riverbank. He should be passing by this place soon," said Mark breathlessly. "Is he alone?" the professor asked. "Yes," said Rob. The professor rubbed his hands eagerly. "And does he have his gun?" "No," Mark replied. "It's with the women in the camp." "Excellent, excellent." The professor grinned. "The time has come to act. Let's get the weapons." They walked swiftly through the forest toward their training ground, a large clearing hidden deep in the woods. A Tuktoak would die today. They had practiced throwing their spears over and over, again and again. They would walk up to him calmly, maybe even exchange a few words. He might be surprised to see them with spears, perhaps a little wary, but he would never anticipate what they were about to do. Upu's disappearance had been a godsend. The professor wasn't sure where the silly girl had wandered off to, but her absence had worked in their favor. Thanks to her, the entire camp had taken the footprint threat seriously. So when a Tuktoak died, no one would suspect a human hand. Everyone would believe it was the man-eater. "I am a warrior," the professor said loudly. The three boys joined the chant. "I survive in the wild. I am a hunter and I am a killer. I drink the blood of my enemies and eat their flesh. The professor thought back to last night, the humiliation, the way a Tuktuak had insulted him in front of everyone. Now revenge was within reach. He could already picture it, the spears piercing a Tuktuak's flesh, the cries of pain, the helpless look in his eyes. And finally the warm gush of blood when the professor himself would cut the chieftain's throat. The professor chuckled, nearly giddy. This is life. This is real living. He roughly slapped Mark on the back, thrilled. As they neared the clearing, he noticed a column of smoke rising into the misty air. He frowned. They slowed down, approaching the clearing cautiously. It was quiet, too quiet, no movement. The weapons, spears and the knife, had been hidden in a small open pit, carefully covered with brushwood. But as they stepped into the clearing, the professor froze in horror. The smoke was rising from the pit. He ran toward it, heart pounding. The brushwood was smoldering. The spears, their spears, were burning. "No!" he shouted, furious. He looked around wildly for something to smother the flames. Finding nothing, he began stomping on them, kicking at the fire in a blind rage. But it was too late. The spears were gone. "There's no point," said Elvis, pulling him back. The professor stared at the pit, devastated. All that remained of their weapons were gray-black slabs of ash. He couldn't believe it. "How did this happen?" he whispered hoarsely. "And where's the knife?" asked Mark, grabbing a small branch to poke through the dying embers. "The knife is gone," said Elvis, stunned. "Someone did this," Rob said quietly. "Someone knew." The professor shook his head in disbelief. "Impossible. If they knew, they wouldn't have fallen for the footprint trick. The entire camp was in a state of panic." "Maybe it wasn't the tribe," Rob said. The four of them turned slowly to scan the forest. The towering trees loomed around them, cloaked in mist, still and watchful. Not a sound, only the crackle of dying fire and the sound of their own breathing. A heavy silence settled. "Maybe," Mark began, his voice trembling despite himself. "Maybe there are others." "Where is my daughter?" Arnak tried to control her rising panic. She was circling toward the river, eyes scanning the ground for any sign of tracks, when she heard the sharp cooey call. It was Oranon, signaling that something had happened. Her heart pounded. Had the man-eater entered their camp? She was a strong, hardy Nenek woman, one who would fight to the death to protect her family. She rushed back, muscles tensed, ready for anything. But as she entered the camp, she froze. Upu stood there, completely unharmed. Her hands were clasped behind her back, and she was chatting with the other tribe members, as if nothing had happened. Arnak ran to her, throwing her arms around her daughter and pulling her into a tight embrace. "Where were you?" she cried. "I just went for a walk," said Upu. Arnak was too relieved to scold her. "Thank the gods you're safe." "Blood was with me." Arnak gripped Upu firmly by the shoulders and stared into her eyes. "Listen to me carefully. You're not a little girl anymore. Things are different now. You can't just wander off like before. There are dangers. Do you understand?" Upu nodded. "Say it. Tell me you understand." "I understand," Upu said softly. Arnak exhaled deeply and kissed her daughter's forehead. "You had me so worried." "I'm sorry." "Where did you go?" "I searched everywhere." "Into the forest." Arnak gently ruffled her daughter's hair, then paused. "What's that smell?" "What smell?" Upu asked, her expression suddenly cautious. "Have you been near a fire?" her mother asked, frowning. "You smell like smoke." Upu didn't answer. That afternoon, the tribe decided to bring the reindeer back to the main camp. After seeing the footprint, a Tuktuak had made his decision. They would pack up and begin their journey north the very next day. Watches were organized to patrol the camp's perimeter, both day and night. Katya and Ukik circled the reindeer herd, gently guiding the animals toward the camp. Upu had come along, riding behind them on a dog sled. Her mother felt assured knowing she was safe with Katya and Ukik, especially since Ukik carried the tribe's second rifle, slung over his shoulder. Katya walked over to the sled. "So, where did you really go today?" he asked Upu. "For a walk," she said. "Why?" "Because I wanted to." "Upu, I know something's going on. What is it?" She bit her lip. It's a secret. I won't tell anyone, Katya promised. I went to burn the weapons, she said hesitantly. Katya clasped his head. That was dangerous. What if the professor had seen you? It had to be done. When I heard about the footprint, I just knew that vile man was up to something. Now it all made sense to Katya. That's why the professor hadn't acted. His weapons were gone. He looked at Upu in amazement. You're far wiser than your years. Upu shook her head sadly. No, he fooled me. He made me steal a knife for him. So that's how he got the knife. I'm sorry, she said. Katya ruffled her hair gently. But you learned from your mistake. That's what matters. You're wise and brave. What happened to the knife? I put it back with Mother's things. We have to tell Father, Katya said thoughtfully. Upu glared at him. You promised you wouldn't tell anyone. I'll just tell him the footprint was fake and that the professor is dangerous. I won't say anything about you. Upu nodded. Then something struck her. Her voice dropped. They wanted to kill someone, she said. That's what all this was about. Katya knew she was right. He couldn't bring himself to say it aloud. It felt too horrifying. The target had most likely been his father. A cold fury rose inside him. One day he thought, I'll make them pay in blood for this. What happened to the professor? Upu asked quietly. He was a good man when we first met him. Madness, Katya said bitterly. That's what happened. This land, it does that to weak people. Upu looked at her brother carefully. When one of our dogs goes mad, she said, we have to kill it to stop it from harming others. Yes, Katya replied softly. Sometimes that's the only way. Chapter 6. After bringing the reindeer herd back to camp, Katya and Uki quickly corralled them and set up net fences. The animals didn't like being penned so closely together and grunted in discontent. Katya then had to lasso the big male reindeer that would be harnessed together to pull the sleds and baylocks. He moved carefully among the animals, selecting the strongest bulls for the job. Lassing these powerful beasts was tough and dangerous. If not handled with caution, their large antlers could cause serious injury. Once a dozen reindeer had been separated from the herd, Katya left for the seashore, where his father had gone earlier to secure their two large boats. During the period of the tribe's absence from those shores, a tuk-tuk would pull the boats from the water and hide them in a cavern that cut into the rocky cliffs near the sea. Katya and his father ran their hands along the smooth hulls, inspecting them. There were a few small cuts and holes which needed to be sealed. They rubbed melted walrus fat over the damaged areas to waterproof them again. A tuk-tuk stood by the shoreline, a gun slung over his shoulder, scanning the horizon with his old binoculars. One final, lingering search. Katya walked up beside him and watched silently, feeling a twinge of sadness. He still hopes the scouts will return. Katya knew it was time to speak. Father, the footprint wasn't real, he said quietly. A tuk-tuk didn't respond. Katya waited a moment. Was he just going to ignore him? Father, he said again, raising his voice slightly. The footprint was not real. A tuk-tuk kept scanning the sea. No? He asked softly. It was the professor, said Katya. He was planning something. I don't know exactly what, but... I doubt that, his father interrupted, still focused on the water. You have to believe me. I saw him making weapons and... At last, a tuk-tuk turned and looked his son in the eye. Katya, you are wrong. Katya's anger flared. Will he never take me seriously? Is he blind to everything around him? And how do you know? Katya snapped. A tuk-tuk pointed out to the sea. Because there, he said, is the man-eater. Katya stared at the black blob lying on an ice floe. From a distance, it looked like a seal. His father handed him the pair of binoculars. Katya looked through them and swallowed a gasp of horror. He could see it clearly now. It was no seal. The figure lay on its stomach, head twisted at a grotesque angle toward the shore. It was naked, and in many places, the skin had torn away, revealing raw muscle and yellowing fat. The face was a ghastly mess. Part of the mouth had rotted away, exposing pale gums and large, fang-like teeth. Something black and oily dripped from its lips. Hair clung to its forehead in matted streaks of clotted blood. Katya's stomach turned. The current was pushing the thing closer and closer to the shore. But maybe it's dead. The eyes snapped open, blood red. The man-eater stood up slowly, wobbling to find its balance on the bobbing ice. Nothing had prepared Katya for its sheer size. It was massive, at least 7 feet tall. He froze, unable to move, unable to speak. The thing looked around, then suddenly locked its gaze on Katya. It growled. It had seen them. Katya lowered the binoculars, his hands trembling. He didn't need them anymore. The monster was clearly visible now. It stared directly at him and his father, snarling, twitching, vibrating with excitement. Katya stumbled backward. "Let's go, father," he cried. "Go where?" asked his father, eyes still fixed on the creature. Katya was stunned. "It's coming towards us. It's going to kill us." "If we don't fight it here," his father said calmly, "we'll have to fight it at the camp." Suddenly, the thing dropped to all fours and began paddling furiously toward the shore. It roared, loud, guttural. A tuk-tuak handed the gun to Katya. "I have 3 bullets. Aim for the head." I can't," Katya stammered, paralyzed with fear. His father's voice remained calm. "Katya, one day you'll lead the tribe. You cannot be afraid." "Father, shoot it. Please, I can't. I just can't." Katya's voice broke. This was a nightmare. How could he take a careful shot at that thing? He could barely look at it without shaking. Deep down, a voice whispered, "You're a coward," but he didn't care. "Please, father, shoot it." A tuk-tuak's expression darkened. "It's just another hunt, son. Sooner or later, we all die. We can't choose our fate, but we can decide how we meet it. Look the danger squarely in the face." Katya took the gun. His body trembled violently. The creature stood upright again, calculating its next move. Katya aimed and fired the first shot. The bullet grazed its elbow. The thing howled in rage, then began crouching, weaving, moving unpredictably. It seemed to understand. It had to keep moving to survive the gun. With shaking hands, Katya loaded the second bullet. The monster was jumping from flow to flow now, closing the distance fast, running, crawling, slithering with terrifying speed. Katya fired again. This time, he missed entirely. The thing was too fast, too erratic. "It wants to kill you," his father said, his voice low and steady. "It wants to kill everyone you love. Your mother, your brother, your little sister." Katya took a deep breath. 1 bullet left. He had to calm himself. He had to stop shaking. He had to make this one count. He quieted his mind, just like his grandfather had once taught him. He watched the creature, studied its movement, found its rhythm. The closer it got, the better the chance for a clean shot. But the sight was monstrous. This huge, blood-slicked beast, seething with rage, was coming for him with animal desperation. Katya waited, finger hovering over the trigger. "I am not afraid of you." The man-eater reached the shore, just a dozen feet away. The stench hit him like a slap. It was putrid, like rotting meat and something worse. Ancient, sick, wrong. The creature lunged. Katya fired. The bullet tore through its skull. Its head exploded. Bones, blood, and brains splattered across the snow. The body crumpled to the ground at Katya's feet, lifeless. Its thick, black blood pooled around his boots. Katya stumbled back, then sank to the ground, dropping the gun. His strength was gone. His hands dangled at his sides. His mind felt blank. The thing lay still in front of him. Dead. A tuk-tuak walked over and sat beside his son. Then, to Katya's surprise, his father put an arm around his shoulders. He wasn't a man given to open affection. They sat in silence, staring at the corpse. "You'll make a good leader, Katya," his father said at last. His voice was quiet but full of meaning. "I know that when death comes for me, I can go with a smile." A tuk-tuak dropped the half-destroyed head of the man-eater in the center of the camp. "Finally, they've started coming," he announced loudly. "We must remain vigilant." Everyone gathered around the grisly sight. Hushed whispers floated through the cold air. Soft prayers were murmured under trembling breaths. Yet a tuk-tuak knew the truth. No matter how terrifying, a visible enemy held far less power over the mind than the unknown monster that lived in imagination. Did you kill it?" Rob asked hoarsely, unable to tear his eyes away from the creature's mutilated face. Atuktuak shook his head. No, Katya did. All eyes turned to Katya, startled, impressed, even reverent. The body's near the shore, Atuktuak continued. Everyone should see it before we leave. Even the children. Know what you're fighting. These are large, strong creatures, but they can be killed. Katya quietly stepped away from the crowd. He walked to the edge of camp, gazing at the snow-capped mountains in the distance. He needed to think, to breathe. Something inside him had shifted after pulling the trigger. He wasn't sure what, but everything felt different now. The danger was no longer a rumor. It was real. These creatures existed, and now they had come to his land. What would tomorrow look like? Would the tribe have to live in constant fear? He sighed. The uncertainty was heavier than the cold. Hey, said a voice behind him. He turned. Kiara. She stepped close and gave him a quick kiss on the cheek. You okay? She asked softly. Katya nodded. I think so. It's just, I feel different. I don't know why. Kiara smiled. Seems obvious. You grew up. They stood close, breath mingling in the icy air. She glanced at his lips for a brief second, then caught herself and looked away, clearing her throat. See you at dinner, she said a little awkwardly. Yeah, Katya replied quickly, his cheeks turning red. He watched her walk away. A wolf howled in the distance. Katya took a deep breath and smiled faintly. Maybe it wasn't such a bad day after all. Top secret. Private and confidential. To the President of the United States of America. From Director, Special Operations Division, Mr. President. This is a final transmission from Harp Station, Alaska. Our experiment, KG-D6, has succeeded in ways we never predicted, and now it has failed in ways we cannot contain. The first strains, KG-61 and KG-62, reanimated the dead but left them brainless and slow. We designated them Artificial Species 2, AS2, aggressive but without cognition, dangerous but primitive. Then came KG-63. The AS3 subjects retained motor skills, memory, new memory, and primitive intelligence. They grew rapidly, up to 7 feet, and exhibited coordinated behavior. Unlike AS2, they do not kill mindlessly. They select, they convert, they feed strategically. We released 7 into a test population of 30 inmates. 7 were turned, 23 were eaten. That was not chaos, that was calculation. On day 291, we believed they perished in sub-zero conditions during an experiment. During the body transport, they ambushed us. They were played dead. They had planned it. In under 10 minutes, they wiped out nearly every soldier, scientist, and technician on site. Only a handful of us remain, trapped in the G6 bunker. They're still here, hunting. We plan to evacuate when the danger is gone. We've confirmed that several AS3 have escaped into the Alaskan wilderness. This breach is irreversible. Containment is no longer possible. The question is no longer if the virus will spread. It's where it will start and who will control the narrative. Mr. President, this is no longer a domestic threat. It is an evolutionary event. We can't afford to be the only nation facing it. The logical next step is Operation Liberty. I urge you to deploy DevGru Unit Z. Spread the KG-63 virus globally, at once. If this outbreak is inevitable, let it be universal. If the world is to change, it must change together, on our terms. A level playing field is our only survival strategy now. You have the means. You have the justification. And if we act now, we still have the advantage. We tried to conquer death. We ended up creating something smarter, stronger, faster, and no longer human. They hibernate. They climb. They survive without food for weeks. They move in packs. They follow leaders. They learn. If America stands alone, America falls. I understand the weight of what I'm asking, but there's no going back. This isn't just an outbreak. It's a transition. Let the world share our burden. Let it burn together. God help us all. Director, Special Operations Division, Harp Research Station, Alaska G6 Bunker, End transmission. Chapter 7. The caravan moved north. The reindeer, harnessed together in lines of two, hauled the baylocks and sleds slowly forward toward the Arctic. Katya moved constantly up and down the line, working to prevent the long, interconnected ropes from tangling. The dogs followed closely behind the caravan. The members of the tribe sat bundled on the sleds. The journey was slow but steady. Since the encounter with the man-eater, an omnipresent sense of danger hung over the group. Until now, the man-eaters had only existed as distant rumors, dark stories from faraway lands. But now they had arrived. They were here, in the Russian Far East, the land the Neneks called home. The main reindeer herd was also being driven north along with the caravan. The thick, rich grasses of the taiga were beginning to fade, replaced by sparse ground cover. Still, the hardy animals could survive, feeding on lichen and moss that grew beneath the permafrost. Fires were lit at night, and watch was kept in shifts. Ammunition was running low. Only a dozen bullets remained, so a tuktuak had begun crafting spears for protection. The thick pine and spruce forests slowly gave way as the caravan inched closer to the tundra. The trees became fewer and shorter. Even in the middle of spring, glistening white patches of snow clung to the greenish-brown landscape. The baylocks moved on rollers made of wood from specially chosen spruce trees, dense, flexible, and strong. They could glide over both snow and dry ground. It was Katya's job to monitor them carefully. Cracks had to be caught early. He would reinforce them with small wooden slats before they could worsen. A broken roller out in the tundra, or worse, in the far Arctic, would be a catastrophe. There would be no trees to make a new one. A tuktuak had taken this journey every year of his life. He knew the land like the back of his hand, the grazing spots, the good campsites, the hidden springs, and the game trails. He had taught Katya to navigate by the stars, to read the winds and shadows. Katya was lost in thought when a tuktuak halted the caravan for the night. Katya sighed. Tonight he would have to sleep in the baylock with the high school group. His father had asked him to keep an eye on the professor. Katya wasn't looking forward to it. He knew he wouldn't sleep. Not with his enemies so close. Not when they might be waiting for the right moment to strike. Camp was set on the leeward side of a large hill, where the winds were less harsh. Open scrubland stretched beyond it in every direction. Seal meat soup was served, and the group ate quietly. Everyone was on edge. The threat of a man-eater attack was wearing them down. Even the professor looked pale and grim. There were no stories tonight, no laughter, no fireside games, just silence. Long, heavy silence. Only the dogs broke it, barking occasionally at the dark. Katya stared into the vast blackness beyond the ring of small fires. The wilderness stretched endlessly in all directions. He could feel the danger, out there, just beyond the light. The fires brought comfort, for now. But Katya knew what was coming. The treeless plains would soon begin. There would be no more wood to burn, no more light to hold back the night. The darkness would only grow. The moonlight filtered in through the translucent window sheet of the baylock. Katya tried to sleep, but it was useless. He didn't trust the people around him. The professor's group resented having to share what they considered their private space with a member of the tribe. But a tuktuak had been firm, brushing aside the professor's protestations. There was, of course, a reason, an excuse, for Katya staying inside the high school group's baylock: mosquitoes. The tribe had begun to encounter thick, swarming clouds of blood-sucking insects. One of the main reasons reindeer migrated north to the colder Arctic regions during the summer was precisely to escape these relentless pests. Without a breeze, sitting outside was unbearable. Even inside the baylock, its door flaps tightly fastened, mosquitoes droned relentlessly. Earlier, Katya had helped Arnak and Aunt Yukai prepare an oily black liquid from heated birch bark. It was smeared on the face and hands to help repel the insects. Mats made of reindeer fur were scattered across the floor of the baylock. Katya lay in a corner. Next to him were Timothy and Lillian, both asleep, and beside them lay the professor and Rob. Rob sat up and looked at Katya. "He is here to spy," he whispered. "Of course he is," the professor replied softly. They were both staring at him in the dim light. Katya pretended to be asleep. His arm was draped across his forehead, shading his eyes. They couldn't tell they were open. "Will they attack me?" Katya felt for the reassuring shape of his sheathed dagger at his waist. and froze. He had left it near the campfire. He was unarmed, and his dogs were nowhere near to protect him. His eyes drifted to Kiara's silhouette at the far end of the baylock. He wished he was beside her. Maybe he could talk to her, see her smile, maybe even hold her hand. He was sure Rob wouldn't attack him if Kiara was near. Katya had noticed that Rob behaved like two different people. Around the professor, he was rude, sneaky, and dangerous. But with Kiara, he was polite, almost gentle. "Keep the sheet off," the professor whispered. "I want to see clearly." "Okay," Rob replied just as quietly. Katya's heart started racing. He saw Rob slowly stand up in the darkness. So they really are going to try something. Katya didn't move. His muscles were tense. His hands clenched. He waited for the attack. He would have to block Rob's first move, then strike, hard, fast, and without hesitation, probably to the throat. There could be no mistakes. But then, something unexpected happened. Rob undressed. A flurry of horrible thoughts flooded Katya's mind. Is it to keep his clothes from getting bloody? Or is he going to try to... Katya swallowed hard. If Rob came closer, he would kill him, and then the professor too. But Rob didn't move toward Katya. He walked to the other side of the room. Katya frowned. Then suddenly he understood, and a knot formed in his chest. This was worse. This was far worse. Rob went to Kiara's mat and lay down next to her, slipping under her blankets. Katya watched, frozen in place. Rob kissed her, on her cheeks, on her neck. She stirred slightly in her sleep. Katya couldn't breathe. Rob pulled the blankets away and climbed on top of her, undressing her in the shadows. So this was what the professor wanted to see. Katya felt a sickening wave of rage and disgust. He could hear light moans as their bodies moved under the covers. Katya shut his eyes tight and wrapped his arms around his ears, trying to block it all out. The sounds, the images, the feeling of helplessness. He didn't know how long he lay like that, but when he finally opened his eyes again, the baylock was silent. Rob had returned to his mat. The professor was snoring. Katya couldn't stay there another second. He got up and quietly stepped out of the baylock. Outside, he lay on the ground, gazing up at the stars. A strong breeze swept across the open tundra, keeping the mosquitoes at bay. The still glowing embers of the campfire provided warmth and a strange comfort, but the storm inside him refused to calm. Thoughts of Kiara and Rob twisted in his mind like knives. He was angry and heartbroken. He couldn't remember the last time he had felt this bad. Katya needed a distraction, so he thought of the man-eater he had shot, the way it moved, the way it attacked, its sheer speed and terrifying power. He imagined facing it again, studying its weak points, learning how to fight it better. The last image in his mind before sleep finally claimed him was of the man-eater's hollow, blood-red eyes, watching, waiting. The professor sat outside the baylock entrance with his weapon. It's ironic, he thought wryly, looking at the sharp, solid spear in his hand. I put so much effort into secretly making weapons, but in the end, it's my enemy who gifts me one. It was early morning, and the reindeer were being harnessed for the day's journey. The camp buzzed with activity. The women were busy packing the pots and pans. Ukik and Katya were readying the sleds. Ornan was feeding the dogs. The professor sat glumly. He knew the risk of a man-eater attack had increased. The creatures had finally begun arriving in Far Eastern Russia. Instead of settling down and building a fortified enclave to fight them off, the tribe still insisted on continuing their journey north, clinging to their nomadic lifestyle. It was madness. Out in the open, in unknown territory, they would be sitting targets. There was only one option left if he wanted to survive. He had to become the leader of the tribe. A direct attack on Atuktuak was no longer possible. The chieftain was too careful now. Tribe members moved in groups of 2 or 3, always armed, always alert. I missed my chance in the taiga, the professor brooded, back when my weapons were mysteriously destroyed. Katya approached the professor's baylock and ran his hands across the sled rollers, inspecting them for cracks. The professor scowled at him. He hated Katya. The boy was far too intelligent, like a little monster who could see straight into his heart and decipher his darkest motives. Worse, he was always talking to Kiara, and she seemed to like him. Kiara was a little older than the professor would have ideally preferred, but he was becoming increasingly obsessed with her. I have to make do with what I have, he thought. Last night, he had enjoyed watching her make love to Rob. The professor licked his lips. Soon she will be mine. As he watched Katya walk away after checking the sled, a spark of inspiration flickered in his mind. The rollers. That was the answer. What he needed was a diversion, a moment of chaos. That would be the perfect time to strike a tukwak. The professor glanced at the sun. There was still half an hour before the caravan would set off. He sat casually next to the roller of his baylock and began to grind away at the ropes with the tip of his spear, quietly, carefully. His goal was to weaken the thick knot that held the roller to the sled. If he succeeded, the roller would crack under pressure once they moved. Then the tribe would have to send search parties to find the right kind of spruce tree. Those strong, large trees were becoming rarer as they moved north. Once found, the tree would need to be cut, a new roller carved, hauled back to camp, and fixed. And in the middle of all that disarray, he would finally get his chance. He would kill a tukwak. That afternoon, the caravan halted near a swiftly flowing river. Lunch was simple, reindeer milk and salted strips of fish. A tukwak sat waiting for Katya and Oranon, who were driving the reindeer herd behind the main group. It was a bright, sunny day. The long night that lay ahead felt far away. In the distance, snow-capped mountains stood silent, timeless. The land around them was awash in wildflowers, violet and yellow, painting the earth in colors of strange joy. The high school group lay on the grass, basking in the warmth of the sun near the riverbank. Children played. Dogs waddled into the shallows trying to catch fish. You need to go up the river, a tukwak told Katya and Oranon when they arrived. There's a ford about 5 miles away, near a deserted village. Peviansk. I know the place, Katya replied. Tell me if the ford is usable, said a tukwak, and make sure the village is truly empty. Can Ukik come with us? Oranon asked, a flicker of worry on his face. He has to stay here to protect the group in case of an attack. As do I. Katya was thoughtful. What if there are people in the village? Everyone left 2 years ago, his father said. There won't be anyone. Oranon chewed his nails. What if it's not safe? Then we'll have to go south along the river and search for another crossing, but it'll be a much longer route. If the village looks empty, should we check it for tools and guns? Katya asked. Oranon turned to him, astonished. Why would his brother even suggest such a stupid thing? No, don't, said a tukwak. Just watch from a distance. If it looks safe, we'll make a quick crossing at the ford. We must stay away from the villages. He paused. After all, it's people who end up as man-eaters. Chapter 8. The dog sled raced across the boggy scrubland. Katya decided to cut through the forest rather than take the open plains beside the river. The forest canopy was thin, and the afternoon sun warmed his face. Blood led the dog's sled, whining with excitement. He senses the impending danger, thought Katya. Smokey ran behind them, occasionally darting off the trail to investigate unfamiliar scents in the woods. Oranon sat nervously beside Katya, nibbling on dried fish strips their mother had packed in a cloth bag. We should have just gone south and looked for a crossing, Oranon muttered. What's the point of risking the ford? Katya shrugged. The reindeer are already being tormented by the mosquitoes. If we stay in these parts too long, some will die. We've got to head north soon. The tundra region was riddled with wetlands, breeding grounds for massive mosquitoes. During spring and summer, they hatched in dense black swarms that engulfed everything in their path. As they approached the ford, Katya grew more alert. He slowed the sled and scanned the surroundings carefully. Then he brought the sled to a stop a safe distance from the water crossing. Oranon frowned. We're going on foot? It's safer. And what if we have to run? Katya slung the rifle their father had given them across his shoulders. We won't have to run. Oranon sighed. I hope you know what you're doing, brother. The sled dogs might bark and give away our position, Katya said. We can't risk bringing them too close to the village. So we have to tie them up? Oranon asked. Yes, we'll take only Smokey and Blood. They won't be able to fight if something comes. They'll be safe. We're the ones who'll be in danger. Katya tied the dogs securely to a thick tree trunk. They whined as he and Oranon began to walk away. "We'll be back," Oranon called to them reassuringly. They trudged forward across the swampy ground. Katya held the rifle ready. Blood and Smokey ran alongside them, ears alert, sniffing the breeze for anything unusual. The forest thinned out into scrubland. In the distance, about 100 feet away, lay the village. Katya and Oranon crouched, signaling the dogs to stay still with a soft whistle. Katya pulled out his father's old binoculars and studied the village. Like most settlements in this part of Russia, Pavyansk had a bakery, a dairy, a stable, and a Lenin statue in its center. Katya couldn't spot any movement. The village looked abandoned. Small gardens outside the wooden huts had grown wild with creepers and thick bushes. The ford was within a stone's throw of the southern edge of the village. Katya knew the only safe way to cross was to search the village first, to make sure no man-eaters were hiding inside. But before that, he would wait and watch, patiently. Katya handed the gun to Oranon and made himself comfortable on the hard ground. He settled in to observe the village. "Make sure no one creeps up on us," he said. "Fine," Oranon mumbled, glancing around uneasily. The warm sun was on Katya's back, and after nearly an hour of watching carefully through the binoculars, he began to feel drowsy. "There's no one in the village," Oranon said at last. "How long are we going to keep watching?" "It seems empty," Katya agreed. He was just about to lower the binoculars when he thought he saw a flicker of movement near one of the small houses. He focused on the structure. The main door and windows were wide open. An empty cart lay abandoned outside. It looked unoccupied like the other huts. Was it just my imagination? Maybe his eyes were playing tricks on him from the strain of concentrating so long. Katya passed the binoculars to Oranon. "Look at the last house near the river. Do you see anything?" Oranon studied the house for a full minute. "Nothing," he said quietly. Katya frowned. "I might have seen something near that hut." "Really? What did you see?" Oranon asked. "I'm not sure." Oranon lowered the binoculars. "Let's go then. It's not safe." "Maybe it was nothing," Katya muttered. "Could have just been a small animal." Ornon's eyes widened with unease. "Or maybe it was a man-eater." Katya frowned deeper. "We need to be sure." "How?" asked Oranon. "There's only one way to find out. There's a large patch of snow around that hut. We have to check it for tracks." Oranon looked at him, dumbfounded. "Go into the village?" Katya nodded. "I'll go in with Smokey. You stay here and keep watch through the binoculars. If you spot a man-eater, cooey, and I'll run out." "That's too dangerous," Oranon protested. Katya's face was resolute. "It has to be done, brother. I have a gun. I'll be safe." Reluctantly, Oranon nodded. Katya rose, brushed the dust off his clothes, and began his descent toward the village. The vantage point from where they had been observing was higher ground. As he walked slowly down into the village, he realized the scrub vegetation, tall grasses, herbs, and bushes, posed an unanticipated danger. If a man-eater crouched low, it could easily hide among the brush and strike with a single leap. He didn't know if man-eaters were clever enough to stalk prey like that. The one he had seen earlier was too aggressive to hide. Then a chilling thought crossed his mind. Maybe they're like humans. Maybe there are clever ones. And not so clever ones. Katya kept a close eye on Smokey. The dog would sense danger long before he would. He moved cautiously, rifle cocked and ready, cutting silently through the bushes. All around him was potential death. He walked on tiptoe, making no sound. Though Smokey was a large dog, she had the instincts of a wolf. She moved silently through the undergrowth. Every few steps, she glanced back at Katya for instructions. They had hunted together so many times that a simple nod from Katya told her whether to stop, move, or attack. But we are not the hunters now, we are the hunted. He had approached to within a few feet of the first of the village huts. Smokey stopped and began whining softly. She had caught a scent. The scrubland had given way to short grass, and now Katya stood exposed in the open. He scanned his surroundings carefully. The village looked abandoned, but the silence was unnerving. Everywhere he looked, there were signs of disrepair. A roof had collapsed on one hut, moss clung to blackened wooden walls, and the gardens were unkempt, overgrown with weeds. Nearby, the skeletal remains of a large animal, probably a horse or a cow, lay half buried in the grass. Katya realized how unnaturally still it was. No bird calls, no buzzing of insects, not even the gentle rustle of leaves. It was as if the village was holding its breath. He decided to circle toward the hut where he had thought he'd seen movement. He had barely taken a few cautious steps forward when Smokey began growling under her breath. She stayed rooted, refusing to move any closer. "Come on," Katya hissed, annoyed. But Smokey darted forward, lightly grabbed his leg in her mouth, and tugged him back. Katya stared at her, startled. She was behaving strangely. She circled him nervously, baring her teeth, growling at him. "She wants us to leave." Katya raised the rifle, keeping it pointed ahead, ready for anything. Still, he pressed forward. He had to know. The snow patches would reveal the truth. If there were tracks, he'd see them. He stepped slowly into the village. The huts, with their dark open doors, offered perfect hiding places. He'd have to be careful. Smokey didn't follow. She remained just outside the perimeter, whining, pacing restlessly, her instincts screaming danger. Katya walked cautiously along the narrow path between the huts. Then he stopped. He had that feeling, the unmistakable sense of being watched. He turned slowly, eyes scanning the shadows, but saw nothing. Still, he'd learned to trust that feeling. It had been a mistake to enter the village. Smokey had definitely caught the scent of a man-eater. What else could it be? She had faced down wolves and bears. No ordinary threat could unnerve her like this. She refused to get any deeper into the village, and with a whine ran back to the entrance. Katya continued forward. What was he trying to prove? That he had the courage to face the monsters? There was a large patch of snow near him, and he slowly walked towards it, looking watchfully around him, listening intently. He looked at the snow and gulped. There were tracks. The snow was crisscrossed with human footprints. He knew it was recent. Whoever had moved across it had done so within the last few hours. But the footprints were small, no larger than a child's. A wave of relief washed over him. The man-eater he had encountered before had been massive, nearly 7 feet tall, with enormous feet. These tracks didn't match. Suddenly, a small pebble dropped a short distance away. Katya froze, gripping his rifle. He turned toward the sound and advanced slowly. Someone had thrown it. Was it a warning? A scare tactic? Could it really be a child? And if so, why was a child alone in this desolate village? And more importantly, was the child even alone? Katya needed answers. He bent down and picked up the pebble, turning it over in his hand. Just then, another stone landed nearby. This was no accident. Someone was guiding him. He walked toward the second pebble and waited. A third rock clinked sharply against the Lenin statue in the center of the village, 20 feet away. He moved cautiously toward the statue. Then, from the corner of his eye, a blur of motion. He spun and caught a glimpse of someone slipping into the stable to his left. Katya lowered his gun slightly, breathing hard. That hadn't been a monster. It had been a girl. A small girl, no taller than he was. She wore a light, muddy frock, her limbs thin, her steps nimble. "Come out," Katya called gently. "I won't harm you." There was no response. A pebble landed just outside the stable door. Katya approached slowly, keeping his gun pointed down. He didn't want to frighten her, but something about the stable, a large shadowy structure with a high ceiling, made him uneasy. With each step toward the door, that unease grew. "Come out," he called again. "I'm here to help you." Still, there was no response from the girl. Does she think it's a game? Katya stood at the entrance of the stable, letting his eyes adjust to the darkness. The only light came from behind him, casting a dim glow into the building. He could just make out the outlines of empty box stalls lining both sides of the entrance. The far end of the stable was swallowed in shadow, too dark to see into. He hesitated. Going inside would be dangerous, but he reminded himself who he was dealing with. A small girl. Then a pebble landed with a sharp crack at the far end of the stable. Katya took a deep breath and stepped in. A foul, putrid stench enveloped him at once. He had smelled it before, at the seashore after he had shot the man-eater. Instinctively, he raised his rifle and moved slowly toward where the pebble had fallen. As he passed each box stall, one by one, he half expected the girl to jump out at any moment. He reached almost the very end. Just a few more steps and he'd be standing exactly where the pebble had landed. Something felt wrong, deeply wrong. This is a trap, he realized. He had been lured into a dark, enclosed space where he could be attacked from any direction. If he hadn't glimpsed the girl before, he wouldn't have walked this far. The stench was stronger now, overwhelming. There had to be a carcass nearby, or maybe something worse. Could man-eaters think, plan, use bait? If they could, then perhaps they were using the girl. If that was true, he had no choice. He had to rescue her. Katya scanned the space beyond the box stalls, a wide-open area, probably used for storing feed. It was pitch dark. He couldn't see whether the girl was standing there. She has to be there. Where else could she go? There were no other exits. The only way out was past him, through the entrance. He stepped deeper into the blackness, past the last of the stalls. She wasn't there. The stench was unbearable now. Katya gagged. He couldn't breathe. He looked down. The pebble lay right near his feet. Whatever's going to happen, it's about to happen now. He hesitated. He somehow knew the girl was waiting for him to pick it up. But where was she? How had she vanished? A cold wave of fear swept over him. His instincts screamed that something was closing in, that he was about to be attacked. But how? The stable was empty. The girl was gone. Unless... Katya's breath caught. He suddenly raised his rifle and aimed it upwards. Just in time. The girl, or what looked like a girl, leapt down from a wooden beam directly above him. In that frozen half-second before she landed, Katya saw her true form. Rotting flesh, hollow eyes, a gaping mouth twisted in a grotesque snarl. A man-eater. He pulled the trigger. The shot tore through the creature's shoulder, spinning it off course. It crashed to the floor beside him with a thud. The recoil from the heavy rifle, fired at such an awkward angle, slammed Katya backward into the stable wall. No time to reload. He dropped the rifle and drew his dagger. The creature howled, bleeding from its shoulder. But it wasn't dead. It charged. Snarling, it sprang for his throat. Katya slashed across its face and dodged to the side. The blade opened a wide, ragged wound. Skin and flesh peeled away in hanging strips. The creature roared in rage and lunged again. Katya caught its arm mid-swing, trying to twist and drive the dagger into its skull. But it was strong, inhumanly strong. With a surge of brute force, the thing hurled him across the stable. Katya went hurtling back, tripped over a rucksack, and crashed to the ground. He looked up. The thing was preparing for what could be the killing leap. Katya knew he wouldn't be able to fight it off lying flat on the floor. He made his decision in an instant. With all his strength, he hurled the dagger at the creature's throat. He missed. The blade struck its collarbone instead. The thing staggered backward from the force of the blow. The dagger had pierced it deep, but it roared again, unrelenting. Katya scrambled to his feet. He was now unarmed. The rifle lay too far away, and the creature had recovered. Katya clenched his fists. "If I'm going to die, I'll die fighting." "Come on!" he screamed at the thing, lunging at it and hammering it with his fists. It growled and sprang away, scaling the wall like a lizard. In one terrifying movement, it crawled across the ceiling directly above him, and then dropped. It crashed onto Katya. They hit the mud floor hard. The creature pinned him, its jagged teeth snapping inches from his face. It thrashed and snarled as Katya gripped its throat, keeping its jaws from closing in. Blood, fat, strips of flesh, and sloughing skin fell onto his face. The reek of decay choked him. He pushed with all his strength, desperate to keep its rotting mouth away, but it was getting closer, slowly, steadily. The jaws clicked furiously, eager to taste blood. Then the creature pulled back cleverly and grabbed both of Katya's wrists in its cold, wet hands. He was helpless. He could no longer hold it back. This is it, Katya thought. I'm going to die. Just as the creature opened its mouth to strike, a blur of motion crashed into it from the side. A shadow flew through the air and slammed into the thing, knocking it off Katya. Smoky. She tore into the creature's throat, shaking it with brutal force. The monster roared in agony, trying to fight her off. But Smoky was relentless. Black, gluey blood sprayed across the mud floor as she clamped down harder. With a final savage rip, she tore the thing's throat wide open. Its head was dismembered from its body. The creature finally went still, lifeless. Smokey circled it, snarling, watching carefully to see if it would rise again. Katya sat up, panting hard. Today is not the day I die. Smokey trotted to him, nuzzling his face, her snout smeared in gore. He wrapped his arms around her. So you came, he whispered. He stood slowly, wincing, and pulled the dagger from the man-eater's corpse. Then he picked up his rifle and stepped into the daylight outside the stable. The sun was warm on his face. He closed his eyes and tilted his head toward it, and then he laughed, loud, unhinged, and free. Smokey tilted her head at him, puzzled. Katya kept laughing. He was not afraid anymore. Chapter 9. It was late evening when the caravan made the crossing. Katya had painstakingly searched the entire village. He had found no signs of other man-eaters. 2 miles from the ford, the tribe made camp in a pine forest. The trees here were much smaller than the ones in the taiga. Campfires were lit, and the women began preparing the evening meal. Katya had told the group about the man-eater he had fought off in the village. A Tuktuak was livid with him for going into the village despite his strict instructions not to. But everyone else listened with fascination as Katya described how the man-eater had tried to lure him into the stable. Katya's watch was on the south side of the camp. He sat near a fire with Ukik and Kiara. All three had their spears ready. The moon was shining brightly, and they could see far into the distance. They were at the edge of the forest, facing a stretch of swampy land with no vegetation except for patches of short grass. They felt safe. No man-eater could sneak up on them. They would see it from at least a mile away. Kiara played with a blade of grass, thoughtful. "So can they think?" she asked Katya. "Yes, but not like us," he replied. Ukik shook his head. "And yet these things are far more intelligent than animals. Throwing those stones to lead you shows they can plan." "We can't fight them with spears," Katya said softly. Kiara was surprised. "But you did it with a knife." "It was just a child, and still it was far stronger than me. We won't have much of a chance against a fully grown one, and they only die when their head is smashed." "We'll see what happens, I guess," said Kiara. Ukik was puzzled. "So did 2 man-eaters get together and have that child?" Katya and Kiara burst out laughing. "I think it was a child who got the disease and then turned into a man-eater," said Kiara. "If they can think, why can't they have a child?" Ukik protested. "Well, because they're dead," Katya said. "Their bodies are decaying." Ukik scoffed. "The one thing they are not is dead." "What exactly are they?" asked Kiara. Katya shrugged. "I don't know." Ukik grabbed his spear. "I have to unharness the reindeer. Keep a careful watch." They watched Ukik walk away. Then they sat silently for a while. Kiara pointed at the sky. "What is that star?" "That's the water demon," said Katya, looking up. "I miss the stories, you know." Katya smiled sadly. "Things are different now. Stories are for happier times." "Maybe they'll remind us of better times," said Kiara. Katya nodded. "Maybe." Kiara looked at the embers flying in the air. "I'm glad you're sleeping with us now. It's safer." "No, I'll be sleeping outside from tonight." "Oh, really? I'm too used to the open." "It's not safe, Katya." "It's safe with the dogs around." Oranon called them for the evening meal. Kiara got up and pulled Katya to his feet playfully. They walked to the main campfire to have their reindeer soup. The night passed uneventfully. It was early morning, and the camp was being packed up for the day's journey. Oranon had the north side watch with Rob and Mark. The three of them stood on a small hill in the pine forest near the camp, gripping their spears. The higher ground made for a good vantage point, and they could see far out into the distance. There was no mist, and visibility was good. The chill in the air made Oranon's teeth chatter. "You look like a pig," said Rob suddenly. Oranon knew it was best to ignore Rob. "If I say anything back, it will only make him angry." Mark grinned. "Pigs should be on all fours, no?" Rob laughed. "Yes, they should." Oranon looked at them warily. "What are they going to make me do?" "Get down on the ground," Rob commanded. Oranon licked his lips nervously. "Please, Now!" shouted Mark. Oranon placed his spear down meekly and got on all fours. "Now move!" cried Rob. Oranon crawled along the ground. Rob leapt onto his back and pinched his ears. "Faster, Piggy! Faster!" Mark howled with laughter and gave Oranon a sharp kick on the backside. Oranon tried to move faster. Rob and Mark were crying with laughter when Katya walked out of the forest. He had been sent to bring the three of them back to camp. He stopped, astounded at the scene before him. Seeing Katya, Rob climbed off Oranon's back and looked at him with contempt. Mark stopped laughing and scowled. Oranon's face was flushed red with embarrassment. Katya was furious. How dare they treat my brother this way? He moved fast. Dropping his spear, he lunged at Rob, grabbing him by the throat and smashing his elbow into Rob's startled face. The blow stunned Rob and he collapsed, clutching his face. Mark attacked Katya with his spear. He thrust it repeatedly, trying to stab him. Katya dodged the attacks, quickly realizing that Mark was going for the kill. If Mark landed a strike, the spear would pierce him easily. Katya rolled, picked up his own spear, and parried the next blow. Then with the blunt end of his weapon, he smashed it hard against Mark's shoulder. Mark screamed in pain and fell. Katya walked up and kicked the spear away from his hand. Mark clutched his injured shoulder. "Please, stop," he stammered. "No," said Katya. With a slow, deliberate punch, he broke Mark's nose. There was an outcry in the camp. The whole group had gathered around Katya. Aunt Yukai was cleaning the blood from Mark's broken nose and applying an herbal paste. Kiara sat next to Rob on the ground, running her fingers through his hair. He had a black eye and a swollen face. The professor was seething. "The boy needs to be punished," he screamed. "They were troubling Oranon," Katya snapped. "Did we hurt him?" Rob spat bitterly. "Look at him. He's perfectly fine." "Did they mistreat you?" Atuktuak asked Oranon. Oranon looked down at the ground, red-faced. He was too embarrassed to admit he'd been bullied. He cleared his throat. "No," he said quietly. "We were just playing." Katya stared at his brother, shocked. "But—" Atuktuak looked straight at Katya. "You disappoint me." Katya didn't know what to say. "He needs to be punished," the professor said again, his voice rising. "And he will be," said Atuktuak. Katya looked at his father, confused. "He doesn't understand. He doesn't see. They are dangerous. They have to be controlled. They should know we will strike back if they try anything. Don't you see that?" "From today, you will stay with the reindeer herd," said Atuktuak. "Alone, until I let you return to camp." "Not alone," Arnak pleaded, worried for her son. Atuktuak remained unmoved. "He is the only one among us who has killed man-eaters. He will survive." Rob and Mark were not satisfied. "That's no punishment," Rob said angrily. "He's with the reindeer most of the time anyway." "Shut up, Rob," said the professor coldly. "The punishment is sufficient." Rob and Mark looked at the professor, surprised, but said nothing more. Katya looked around the group. The professor looked smug. Kiara was glaring at him. He had never seen her look at him like that before. "She hates me," he thought with a sinking heart. No one said anything. No one protested. Oranon had lied. He felt betrayed by the tribe. And these are the people I risk my life for every day. He walked out of the gathered circle toward the dog sled. "They want me out of the camp. So be it." Katya stayed with the reindeer. He moved the herd north, following the tracks of the caravan. At night, he stayed awake, guarding the animals from bears and wolves. He had 5 sled dogs with him, along with Smokey and Blood. In the beginning, he was too angry to miss human companionship. But as the days passed, his thoughts drifted more and more toward the tribe. Ukik visited him every 2 days with food and news. So far, there had been no signs of man-eaters. Katya wondered if the professor was still scheming. Ever since Upu had burned his weapons, he hadn't done much. These days, he seemed subdued, almost demoralized. Katya was surprised the professor hadn't asked for harsher punishment. He seemed satisfied with Katya staying out with the reindeer, something that, if Katya really thought about it, wasn't much of a punishment at all. He spent his time training. He strung together dried pieces of wood to build a 7-foot effigy of a man-eater. Then he practiced fighting it with his spear. He knew the tribe's dozen bullets wouldn't last long. When they ran out, survival would come down to hand-to-hand combat. A week passed. Katya sat in the dark, surrounded by the reindeer. He didn't want to light a fire and draw attention. He had found a good pasture on the hillside for the herd. The land sloped gently down to a marshy scrubland that stretched for miles. From his vantage point, he could see the tribe's main camp in the distance, their fires burning brightly in the night. The flames provided warmth and comfort, but they also drew eyes. Katya frowned. The fires were large enough to be seen all the way to the horizon. He missed Kiara. He wondered what she was doing now. Probably having her soup, or maybe lying in the baylock snuggled up with Rob. He remembered the way she had stroked Rob's hair after the fight, so gentle and caring. It had hurt more than the punishment. She had looked at Katya like he was a stranger, maybe even a threat. Katya sighed. Rob's the luckiest guy in the world. Will she ever forgive me? Will we ever talk again? Is the friendship over? He tried to push the thoughts out of his mind. Thinking about her only made him feel worse. The dogs were curled up beside him, sleeping. They had dug into the hard earth, burrowing little beds to trap warmth. Katya knew the slightest scent or smallest sound would wake them. The professor would never change. Katya remembered his smug, satisfied face as he left the camp. That man was planning something. He always was. And Katya's absence from camp would only help him. His father had told the professor that the land would never be his. Katya now understood what those words meant. The professor and his group would never find peace here. This land would not welcome them. Slowly they were being transformed, becoming something else, something cruel, something monstrous. They were losing their humanity. A kind of madness was creeping in. It had already begun to take hold, and it was happening just as the real danger, the man-eaters, had returned. Smokey sat up, ears pricked, and sniffed the air. Nearby, Blood rose to his feet and began growling. Both were staring at a small hill close to the pasture. Katya stood up, alert. His eyesight was sharp, and the moonlight was strong enough to let him see all the way to the top of the hill. There were no trees or shrubs on it, nothing that could block his view. He scanned carefully for any shape or silhouette. Nothing. The other dogs stirred briefly, but soon returned to sleep. Katya knew Smokey and Blood had caught a scent. Something faint, momentary. But of what? A light breeze was drifting down from the hill. Whatever it was, it lay on the far side. Katya knew he had to investigate. If it was an animal, he could drive it off. But if it was a man-eater, the guns were all in the main camp. Out here, he had only his spear and his knife. Katya didn't want to think about it. If it's a man-eater, I'll have to fight it. What else can I do? Come on, he whispered to the dogs. Smokey and Blood followed as Katya walked toward the hill, spear in hand. He wished his father had given him a gun. He moved quietly, carefully, pausing often to check the patches of snow for tracks. As he neared the hilltop, he gave a soft pat to his thighs. The dogs stayed close at his heels. They were growing tense, alert. They had definitely caught a scent. Whatever it was nearby. Katya crouched low and made the final few steps on all fours. He reached the crest and peeked over the other side. Everything was still. The slope below was dense with shrubs and squat tangled trees. A small stream glittered at a distance. Blood was growling again, louder this time. Quiet, Katya hissed. He didn't want to give away his position, whether to man or beast. He scanned the landscape, watching for any flicker of movement. Nothing. But the dogs were focused, staring at a thick patch of sedge. Its long, sharp blades made for perfect cover. A good hiding spot, Katya thought. He narrowed his eyes, straining to see through it. Then he heard it, a light rasping cough. Katya froze. That's no animal. Smokey and Blood went still. Good dogs, they knew that sound meant something serious. They turned to Katya, muscles tense, waiting for the command to strike. Katya slowly stood. He signaled with his hand. The dogs moved like ghosts, sleek and silent, weaving between boulders and rocks, keeping low. They were stalking now. Katya crept down the slope, nearing the sedge. There. Movement, just behind the curtain of grass. The dogs froze, motionless. Ready. Katya stepped forward slowly. He reached out and parted the leaves, and found himself staring directly into the battered face of a man. They were inches apart. The man gasped. Katya recoiled in shock. The dogs leapt forward, ripping into the bush with a ferocious growl, their bodies tense with killing intent. No! Katya shouted. Smoky and blood halted, just inches from the man's throat. Obeying. There were two men huddled in the bushes, both in grimy, torn Russian army uniforms. Each grabbed a thick stick, holding it up instinctively as the dogs circled, snarling. They were stunned, filthy, bruised, exhausted. Katya stepped into the bush. "Who are you?" he asked. The men stared at him, eyes wide, mouths open. No comprehension, only a fragile mixture of relief and fear. They looked like they hadn't eaten in days. Their faces were drawn and pale. Their clothes were blood-stained and rotting. "Who are you?" Katya asked again, his voice lower now. One of them muttered, "He is human." The other whispered, maybe we won't die yet." Then one of them collapsed to his knees. Tears filled his eyes. "Thank you," he cried, looking up to the sky. "Thank you." Chapter 10. Katya returned to camp with the two men. They were starving, and hungrily devoured the fish and reindeer stew offered to them. Everyone in the group had gathered around, curious and silent. Katya looked at his father. "You can stay," Atukwak said. The two men spoke haltingly between mouthfuls, their hands shaking slightly as they ate. Slowly they began to share their story. Artyom and Yegor were soldiers, part of the Spetsnaz Task Force 9. They had belonged to an elite unit sent to secure a nuclear base during the early days of the infection. Moscow had been the first to fall. Within 3 days, the city was a no-go zone. The man-eaters overran the streets, multiplying, spreading outwards like a horrifying plague. For nearly a year, Task Force 9 remained safe inside the heavily fortified nuclear base. The commandos carried out regular raids across Siberia by helicopter, eliminating as many man-eaters as they could. But the victories were short-lived. Fuel and ammunition began to dwindle. Communication with the government was lost. Orders stopped coming. Eventually, the raids were called off, and the remaining soldiers focused on survival, sealing the base and keeping the infection out. But then the sickness got inside. No one knew how. It was believed that during one of the routine patrols, a soldier had been bitten and chose not to tell anyone. Maybe he was afraid of punishment. Maybe he thought he could fight it. He couldn't. The infection spread like wildfire. There was chaos, fierce fighting between the healthy and the infected. Most of the soldiers, scientists, and support staff were either killed or turned into man-eaters. Blood ran through the corridors. Screams echoed in the cold steel walls. A dozen Spetsnaz commandos packed what they could and fled the base on snowmobiles, vanishing into the vast Siberian wilderness. They found a disused gulag, an old Soviet-forced labor camp. It gave them shelter, kept out the cold, and protected them for a while. But their supplies were running out. So Artyom and Yegor left to forage, hoping to find villages, people, something. Instead, they found silence. Every town they entered was empty. Abandoned homes, frozen corpses, wind-blown doors swinging on rusty hinges. It was midwinter. Game was scarce. The sea was frozen. Animals had migrated south. Ammunition was gone. They were nearly dead when Katya found them. Artyom stared into the fire, his eyes dark and hollow. "The man-eaters are like your worst nightmare," he muttered. "They are demons. Their flesh rots. Their eyes burn with hate. They are the undead. Pray you never see one." "We've seen them," Katya said quietly. Yegor slurped the last of his soup and belched. "Then they've made it this far east." "More than the way they look," Artyom added. "It's the smell I'll never forget. That stench." The children huddled close, frightened by the soldiers' words. "Is no place safe from the man-eaters?" Upu asked. Yegor laughed bitterly. "No, they come everywhere. There's no point in hiding. We should all prepare. For death. Or worse." "How do you fight them?" Katya asked. "You don't," Yegor replied coldly. "You run." "You can shoot them in the head," Artyom said. "That's the only way. Hand-to-hand combat is suicide. They're stronger, faster, and smarter," Yegor muttered. Katya studied the men closely. Their faces were weather-beaten, their bodies worn down. But there was something else. Beneath the fatigue, they carried a dangerous edge, an unfriendliness. Their eyes were empty, cold. These were not good men. They were desperate survivors, and desperate men could do anything. Beside him, Smokey was growling low, barely audible, her hackles raised. She sensed it too. "Did you meet any other tribes?" a Tuktuak asked. "No," Artyom replied flatly. "There's no one left. The epidemic wiped them all out." "Or worse," Yegor added darkly. "You are safe here with us?" the professor said, his voice dripping with false warmth. "Recover your strength. We have food. Plenty of it. The tribe could use strong men. Welcome." Both soldiers nodded silently. Artyom rubbed his belly, satisfied and sleepy. "And then you'll all help me take food to the others in the gulag," he mumbled, almost to himself. A Tuktuak said nothing. His eyes never left the two men. Later that night, a Tuktuak left to be with the reindeer. He didn't take the dog sled. Instead, he decided to walk the 3 miles to where the herd was. "I don't trust these two men. All the dogs should be here," a Tuktuak told Katya before leaving. Katya was glad to be back in camp. He was eager to learn more about the man-eaters. Apart from Ukik and Oranon, who had the first watch, everyone had gone into their baylocks. The Russian soldiers lay near the campfire, full and satisfied after their heavy meal, chatting idly. Katya sat next to them. "Tell me more," he urged. "Do the man-eaters talk?" Artyom grimaced. "Not to us, but among themselves they make noises. They communicate." "So do wolves when they're hunting," Katya said thoughtfully. "Yes, but these demons are far more intelligent," said Artyom. "Do your friends in the gulag have guns?" asked Katya. Yegor looked at him suspiciously. "Why do you want to know?" Katya shrugged. "Because we need weapons." Artyom shook his head. "Our ammunition is almost gone." "Where can we get more then?" Katya pressed. "In cities?" "The cities and big towns are overrun with man-eaters," said Artyom. "There are no army bases nearby. But yes, if you do manage to reach one, you might find guns." "Is there no cure?" Katya asked. "Something to stop people from turning into man-eaters?" "Not that I know of," said Artyom. Katya was silent for a moment. "Is there any part of the world that's safe?" Artyom looked into the fire. "Do you know the village of Oymyakon? It's near Yakutsk. Coldest human settlement in the world. I've heard of people going there." Yegor was irritated. "You don't understand, boy. It's over. This is the end of the world. In 10 years, there won't be any humans left. The sooner you accept that, the better." "There's no point to anything," Artyom added flatly. "If that's the case, I shouldn't have saved your lives," Katya said sharply, "since there's no point to anything." "Yes, maybe you made a mistake," said Artyom, eyeing Katya with a cold, unreadable stare. "And maybe this mistake will cost you dearly," scoffed Yegor. "After all, we were being followed by a man-eater. Now it's going to track us. To you." "What do you mean?" Katya asked. The Russian soldiers looked at each other. Artyom took a deep breath. "There was a man-eater trailing us. These things can track you for days. It was close before you found us. Now you'll have to kill it. It must be nearby." Katya stood up, tense. "My father's gone to the herd by himself. Why didn't you tell us this earlier?" Yegor frowned. "Why is your father alone? Is he stupid?" Katya bit his lips. It was likely the man-eater would follow their scent to the reindeer herd. His father was alone out there, and with no dogs to warn him. "I have to go," Katya thought. He considered taking Ukik along, but knew someone had to stay behind and defend the camp. Katya grabbed the dog harness from a wooden stake driven into a tree and hurried to the nearby sled. "Listen, boy," Artyom called out behind him. Katya turned to look. "I know what you want," Artyom said, studying him carefully. "And what's that?" Katya asked. "Hope. You're looking for hope." Katya glanced at the dancing flames near the men. "It's true," he thought. "I want to believe things will get better." Artyom spat into the snow. "But there is none." Chapter 11. A Tuktuak sat silently on a hilltop. The ground sloped gently into the wide scrublands around him. From this high perch, he could see the entire reindeer herd gathered at the base of the hill, under the moonlight. He remained motionless, eyes sharp and watchful, his spear resting across his shoulder. The moonlight began to fade. A Tuktuak looked up and saw thick gray clouds creeping across the sky. Darkness deepened, and soon he could no longer make out the reindeer below. Rising slowly, he began to descend the hill and decided to circle around the herd to keep watch from all sides. He had completed half the circle when he noticed something strange. The animals were all staring intently in the direction of the very hill he had been sitting on. He instinctively tightened his grip on his spear and walked through the herd toward the slope. Then the frightened call of a reindeer rang out near the hill. The animals seen something. Atuktuak hoped it was just a bear or a wolf. Moving swiftly now, he headed toward the hill. More warning calls echoed from the same direction, and panic spread through the herd. The reindeer began to stampede away from the slope. Atuktuak shouted, trying to cut through the wave of fleeing animals. They pushed past him, frantic and wild. He struggled to keep his footing. He knew that if he fell, he would be crushed beneath their hooves. With every ounce of strength, he forced his way through the massive bodies until, finally, he broke free. And then he saw it. A reindeer lay on the ground, twitching, still alive, its belly torn open as a massive figure crouched over it, devouring its insides. A man-eater. Atuktuak raised his spear, eyes fixed, hands steady. The man-eater lifted its blood-smeared face and looked at him. It growled, rising slowly to its full, terrifying height. The creature began to advance, snarling with menace. But it didn't attack immediately. Instead, it seemed to study him, testing, calculating. Then it dropped to all fours and began circling Atuktuak in great frog-like leaps, slowly tightening its radius with every round. The smell hit him, the putrid, nauseating stench of rotting meat. The creature snarled and shrieked, moving faster now, the circle tightening to just a dozen feet. It was close enough to leap. Suddenly, the creature flung a handful of wet mud into Atuktuak's face. Blinded, he instinctively raised his spear, knowing what would come next. The man-eater lunged. The sharpened end of the spear smashed into the thing's open mouth, cracking its jaw and shattering its teeth. The creature fell back, howling and clutching its broken face. Atuktuak wiped the muck from his eyes and charged forward, plunging his spear hard into the creature's side. The blade sliced into its gut, tearing flesh and spilling blood, organs and bile into the mud. The creature screeched, grabbing the embedded spear before Atuktuak could withdraw it. It thrashed wildly, trying to rip it from his grasp. Then, without warning, Atuktuak let go. Caught off balance, the creature stumbled and fell. As it scrambled to rise, Atuktuak lunged forward, gripped its filthy head, and, without hesitation, drove both his thumbs into its eyes. The man-eater shrieked, blind and writhing in agony. Atuktuak yanked the spear free and, in one clean, practiced motion, drove the butt end into the side of its head. The creature went limp. He stepped back, breathing heavily, the night still and deathly quiet once more. The reindeer were gone, scattered into the vast wilderness. He would need to find them later. For now he sat beside the corpse, trying to steady his breath. Above, the moon broke through the clouds again, casting silver light across the scene. Then he saw it. Atop the hill, where he had sat not long ago, stood a figure, a silhouette. It watched him silently. For a moment, its stillness made him think it was human. But no, its posture was too awkward, its body too powerful. It was another man-eater. Atuktuak rose and lifted his spear. He had killed one. He could kill another. But then 2 more silhouettes emerged behind it. Then 3, 4, 10, a whole pack. The creatures began to fan out around him, encircling the base of the hill. The trap was closing. Atuktuak knew he was being surrounded. He considered making a run for the river. He might be able to outrun them, just maybe. But he laughed softly at the thought. He was a Nenek chieftain. He wore the wolf's head and fur. This was his land. He would not run. He made a quick prayer to the stars above, to the spirits of his ancestors. He would be joining them soon. He only wished he'd had time to say goodbye, to his tribe, to his family, to Katya. He drew a deep breath, the spear firm in his grip, and faced the darkness. The creatures charged, from every side. Where is the herd? Katya stared at the empty land stretching before him, confused and alarmed. He brought the dog sled to a stop, baffled. Had his father moved the reindeer for some reason? Under the moonlight, he bent down to study the tracks on the ground. His heart sank. There had been a man-eater attack. The signs were unmistakable. Without hesitation, he unharnessed the dogs and began following the large, unmistakable footprints left behind by the creature, dreading what he might find. "Father!" he yelled. There was no reply. In the distance, he spotted a small group of 4 reindeer grazing nervously. He ignored them and continued following the tracks, which seemed to lead to the base of the hill where the herd had last been seen. Katya's hands were trembling. Fear coiled inside his chest. He clung to one desperate hope. His father was still alive. A sudden howl pierced the silence. "Smokey!" Katya sprinted toward the sound. Smokey was a little way off, standing still. Katya followed the dog's gaze and froze. Something lay on the ground. Slowly, cautiously, Katya walked toward it. It was his father's clothes. Blood-soaked, torn, shredded. The sight was unbearable. His father had been eaten by the man-eaters. Katya fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face. His body shook with grief. The earth itself felt like it was falling apart beneath him. The coffin had no body, only fragments of bone. As was the Nenek tradition, it was fastened high up on a tree, so the spirit could fly freely to the stars. Katya stood beneath it, devastated. His father had always been a constant presence. Even in the darkest of times, Katya had carried hope in his heart, because he knew his father would find a way. He always did. But now that hope was dying. Maybe it's true after all, he thought. The age of man is ending. The age of the man-eater has begun. The tribe remained in a state of stunned silence. It wasn't until the following afternoon that Ukik, Ornan, and Katya set out to round up the scattered reindeer. Of the more than 100 reindeer they once had, only 60 were recovered. Many had been slaughtered, their bodies torn open and devoured. The rest had vanished, fleeing in all directions. Katya felt only rage. He hoped to find the man-eaters. He wanted revenge, but the creatures were gone. Their tracks trailed off to the south, following some of the fleeing animals. Katya turned to the others. "I want to follow the trail. Hunt them down." Ukik shook his head. "They'll be miles away by now, and there were at least 10 of them." "I'll go alone," said Katya. "You both stay with the caravan. I'll find you in a week or so." Ukik looked at him seriously. "Katya, we need to stay together. These things killed half the herd. Once they're done, they'll circle back to the hill. Then they'll come for the caravan. We'll see them again soon, and we need to be ready." Katya clenched his fists. "Then I'm letting my father down. I have to fight them. Either I kill them, or they kill me." Ornan stepped forward, his eyes steady. "Father wants more from you, brother." Katya paused, breathing hard. He looked away for a moment, then took a deep breath, trying to calm the fire in his chest. Without a word, he turned and followed Ukik and Ornan to the dog sled. He would fight, but not today. Chapter 12. Ornan stared into the small cracked mirror and grimaced. He looked ridiculous wearing the wolf's head and fur coat, the sacred symbol of a Nenek chieftain. Alone in the baylock, he hesitated, unsure of stepping outside. Sweat trickled down his brow. He wiped it away and nervously bit his nails. Outside, near the campfire, the entire tribe was waiting. They expected to hear from their new leader. He couldn't stop the thoughts swirling inside his mind. "I'm not ready for this. I'm not my father. I don't want this." Then he noticed the dark patches on the fur. Blood. His father's blood. Ornan felt dizzy, nauseous. He reached out and held onto the heavy wooden table in the middle of the room, steadying himself, gasping for air. "His blood is on me." The thought clawed at his brain. Every time he wore this coat, he would remember. His father's death would hang over him like a sword, a constant burden. Furiously, he rubbed at the dried blood. He wanted it gone. "It won't go away," said Aunt Yukai behind him. Ornan spun around, startled. "You scared me." "Come," she said gently. "It is time." He took a long breath and followed her toward the campfire, his footsteps heavy with dread. The sky was thick with clouds, no stars in sight. "My ancestors are ashamed of me," he thought bitterly. Camp dogs moved nervously in the dark, sniffing the air. Everyone stood armed with spears. Mark, Rob, and Elvis grinned when they saw him. "Here's our piggy," Mark snorted. Rob sneered. "He looks ridiculous." "Shut up," Katya snapped. Mark and Rob fell silent. Ever since Katya had fought them, they had kept their distance. They didn't want another confrontation. The ceremony itself was brief. Fresh reindeer blood was smeared across Oronon's face. The women whispered prayers to the stars, and Arnak tossed dried grass into the fire. Sparks danced upward into the sky. One by one, tribe members congratulated him. Then came the moment he feared most, the speech. Oronon stood stiffly before the gathered tribe, their faces lit by the fire's orange glow. Katya had advised him earlier, talk about overcoming adversity. Oronon had rehearsed a short speech in his mind, but now standing there, his mind went blank. Words escaped him. Silence grew. The professor smirked. The two Russian soldiers watched him with unreadable expressions. "Do we continue our journey north?" asked Kiara gently, trying to help. Oronon cleared his throat. "Yes." "No," said the professor. Everyone turned to him as he rose and walked to the center of the fire circle, standing beside Oronon. "There's a better idea," he said smoothly, clearly enjoying the attention. "We know—" "The chief decides," Katya interrupted sharply. The professor frowned. "I'll speak, and then he can decide." "That's not our custom," Katya snapped. The professor turned to Oronon. "Can I speak?" "Well, yes," Oronon mumbled, nervous and unsure. He was afraid of the professor. "Good," said the professor. "As I was saying, there are at least a dozen man-eaters on our trail. Artyom and Yegor will confirm it. Killing even one is nearly impossible. With a few wooden spears, we don't stand a chance against a pack of them. Look at what happened to Atuktuak. Was there anyone stronger? And yet he fell. Going north unprepared is suicide." "What else can we do?" asked Ukik. "Stay here? We can't fight them off here either." "You're right," the professor agreed. "We can't survive here. But there is a place we can survive. A place with walls strong enough to keep the monsters out. A place with other men who will help us." "Where?" asked Katya suspiciously. "The gulag," Artyom answered. "Where our comrades are stationed. It's a 7-day journey west." The tribe members murmured. Confusion spread. "If we move fast," the professor continued, "we might reach it before the man-eaters catch up. We won't stay forever, just long enough to get through this. Then we can continue north, as planned." Katya frowned. He didn't trust the soldiers. "I don't think—" "You're not the chieftain," Rob interrupted mockingly. "No matter how badly you wish you were." "Let the fat one decide," Yegor said, grinning. The professor's group laughed. Oronon flushed with shame. He looked down at his feet, humiliated. "They know I'm not a leader. They're all laughing at me." "Come on," said Artyom, irritated. "Tell us, boy, do you want to live or die?" Oronon hesitated, then, "We will go to the gulag." Katya stood abruptly. "What about the reindeer? They need to move north. We don't even know if there's pasture to the west." "The chief has spoken," said the professor, clapping a heavy hand on Oronon's back. "Well done." Katya wasn't finished. "This is a mistake." "Katya," Arnak said sternly, stepping forward. "Your brother is the leader. He has decided." "But mother—" "No," she said, shaking her head. "It's final. We shall not talk about this anymore." The caravan moved west. The melting snow had turned the land into a patchwork of swamps and murky pools, making progress painfully slow. Mosquitoes multiplied by the hour, becoming a constant torment. The reindeer, driven by instinct to migrate north in the summer months, grew increasingly restless. Being forced west agitated them further, and controlling the herd became harder with each passing day. Katya found himself constantly busy. He and Ukik had taken over his father's share of the responsibilities, dividing the work between them. Katya slept late and rose before the first light of dawn. He welcomed the exhaustion. The long, grueling days helped keep his mind off the crushing memory of his father's death. He remained vigilant at all times. There was always the looming threat of the man-eaters, but Katya was equally wary of the professor's group and the two Russian soldiers. The dogs never left his side, acting as both companions and protectors. He made sure the reindeer stayed close to the caravan, always within sight. Since they were moving through unfamiliar territory, Katya had taken it upon himself to scout ahead with the dog sled each morning, seeking the safest and driest route. It was early. The camp was just beginning to stir as Katya harnessed the dogs. He noticed Kiara throwing cold water on her face. She'd been on night watch duty with Ukik and Timothy, and her fatigue showed. Katya called out to her, "Do you want to ride on the sled?" She blinked and considered it. "Where are you going?" "To check the path ahead." She shrugged. "Why not?" Too late to catch any sleep now. With Blood leading the pack, the sled glided across the boggy terrain, navigating the watery patches with ease. The sun broke across the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and orange. The mist slowly lifted, revealing a glistening, damp landscape. A cool wind blew against their faces. Kiara's hair flew wildly in all directions as she tried to tuck it behind her ears. She smiled. "I feel alive again, for the first time in a long while." "Me too," Katya replied. But deep down, he knew the feeling wasn't from the view or the wind. It was from being away from the others. "I'm sorry about the fight," he said after a pause. "Forget it," she replied, brushing it off. "What do you make of the soldiers?" he asked. Kiara was thoughtful. "I hate them." Katya nodded. "Why?" "The way they look at me," she muttered. "It's creepy." Katya steered the sled around a low ridge. "I don't trust them either," he said grimly. "Where's Smokey?" Kiara asked, suddenly scanning the surroundings. "She's not following us." Katya shrugged. "Sometimes she goes off hunting. She's done it before. Might be gone for a couple of days." Kiara suddenly pointed ahead. "What is that?" Katya pulled the sled to a stop. "Looks like a hut." He reached into the knapsack and took out the binoculars. It wasn't just a hut, it was an entire town. He could make out several structures, homes, barn, storage buildings. The place seemed abandoned. There was no movement. He passed the binoculars to Kiara, frowning. He wasn't sure what to make of it. It was best to keep as far away from the town as possible. But to his left, the ground had become one massive swamp. Trudging through it would slow the caravan down miserably, possibly forcing them to stay near the town for 2 full days. If the man-eaters who had killed his father were still on their trail, that delay might be all they needed to catch up. Fighting them in the swamp, shrouded in thick fog day and night, was suicide. Worse still, the town might harbor more man-eaters who joined the hunt if they heard noise or smelled blood. To his right stretched a line of steep hills. They couldn't possibly get the baylocks and sleds across that terrain. Katya bit his lip. They had only 2 options. 1. Retrace their path for almost an entire day, circle around to the open land before the hills, and head west safely, skirting the town from a distance. Or 2. Take a gamble. Move the caravan quickly past the edge of the town. From where the town ended to the start of the hills was less than 100 feet. Even if they hugged the hillside, they'd be clearly visible from the village. "Anybody there?" Katya asked. Kiara lowered the binoculars. She shook her head. "Let's go back," said Katya. "Why?" she asked, surprised. Katya hesitated. "To tell the tribe. I mean, why aren't we first checking if there are man-eaters inside?" Katya shrugged. "It's too dangerous. We could check for tracks near the town. We wouldn't even have to go inside." He shook his head. "It's risky." "I don't get it," Kiara said. "A few days ago, you went inside that village looking for tracks. What's different now?" Katya knew the answer. "You're with me? I'm not going to put your life in danger." He searched for a reason he could say aloud. "Nothing's different," he said. "It just seems like a large place. It's more likely that there are man-eaters inside." Kiara looked at him closely. "It's me, isn't it?" "No," Katya replied too quickly. "You don't think I can fight?" "That's not it." Kiara's eyes narrowed. "Yes, it is. Well, I'm going to check for tracks. You can stay here." She turned and began walking toward the town. Katya hurried after her. "Wait," he said. She didn't stop. "No." "I can't lose you too," Katya blurted out. Kiara froze. "Oh." Katya flushed. "I mean, yes, Suddenly she stepped forward and kissed him. Her lips were soft and cool and full of something that made his chest ache. Katya closed his eyes. For a moment the world faded. The danger, the fog, the town. His heart pounded so hard he could barely breathe. But it ended too soon. Kiara pulled back, reluctant but resolute. "We're still going to check for tracks," she said. Katya couldn't find his voice. Overwhelmed, he simply nodded. Side by side, they began walking toward the town. Chapter 13. The small town was surrounded by grasslands. The blades of bright green spring grass barely reached a few inches off the ground. Katya was relieved. There were no trees or boulders on the path that could conceal a lurking man-eater. They had come within a stone's throw of the first buildings. An old picket fence enclosed the settlement, and a wide, slushy mud road led into the town. Katya knew that such ground was perfect for spotting tracks. That's when he realized, with a pang, that he should have brought blood with him. He'd been too distracted by the kiss. But Katya's heart was soaring. Does this mean she likes me? He wanted to kiss her again, and again. He glanced at Kiara, walking purposefully beside him, scanning the outlying buildings with careful eyes. They reached the mud road near the entrance. Slowing down, they began inspecting the ground. "There," whispered Kiara, pointing ahead. The road was marked by large, human-like footprints. Katya bent down to examine them. They were a couple of days old, but he could tell. There were 3 different sets. "There are man-eaters here," Katya said softly. "Large ones." They turned and began walking briskly away from the town, glancing over their shoulders, constantly alert. When they reached the sled, Blood growled low, displeased at being left behind. Katya knelt and rubbed his head. Kiara climbed into the sled. "What do we do now? Are we risking going this way?" Katya was thoughtful. "Maybe. Going back and finding another way around will cost us time. The man-eater pack could catch up." "You know, you seem to want that," Kiara said, looking at him closely. Katya studied his hands. "They killed my father. I want to fight them." "Even if it risks the lives of everyone in the tribe?" she asked quietly. Katya didn't answer. He knew she was right. He wanted vengeance, but not at the cost of innocent lives. He turned the sled and steered it back toward the caravan. The sun was now shining brightly overhead. The mist had lifted. They raced across open meadows painted with red wildflowers. Katya hesitated, then reached out and took Kiara's hand in his. She gave a gentle squeeze and rested her head on his shoulder. Everyone had a different idea about what to do next. Ukik wanted to attack the town directly, fight any man-eaters inside, and then make the crossing. The professor insisted they turn back and find another route that completely bypassed the settlement. Arnok believed the swamp was the safest path. The fog, she said, would hide them from both the pursuing man-eaters and any that might be lurking in the town. Katya, listening to the chaos of conflicting opinions, found himself wishing his father were still alive. His father had always known what was best for the tribe. "From my experience," Aryum said, scratching his face thoughtfully, "the man-eaters mostly hunt at night. You only see them in daylight if they're disturbed." Yegor grunted his agreement. "It's true. We could cross right beside the town if we're quiet, but with the reindeer and dogs, one bark, one wrong move, and they'll be on us." "It seems to be the best option," Katya finally said, making up his mind. Arguments broke out again. Oranon, the chieftain, remained silent. After much heated debate, the group decided they would attempt the crossing near midday, when the sun was high and visibility clear. "We had sniper training with the Russian Special Forces," said Yegor. "Let us carry the guns." Katya hesitated. "We'll see if the need arises." "We're not your enemies," Artyom said coldly. "I know that," Katya snapped. "He's always been suspicious of my group too," the professor said, voice sharp with resentment. Yegor looked insulted. "We're offering to protect your tribe, and this is how you respond?" Katya remained unmoved. "I saved your life, remember?" "What do you think, Chief?" the professor asked, eyes shifting to Oranon. Oranon hesitated. Katya stepped forward. "The guns should stay with me and Ukik, brother," he pleaded. The professor glared at Oranon. "Well?" Oranon folded under the pressure. "The soldiers can have the guns. They'll protect us." Katya turned away, disappointed. "My brother is weak and spineless," he thought grimly. "He's going to lead the tribe into disaster." Then guilt crept in. It wasn't right to think that way about his own blood. He scanned the crowd, wanting to talk to Kiara. He spotted her with Rob. Katya sighed. Despite the kiss, nothing had changed. Rob was still her boyfriend. He watched her for a moment, then quietly left to round up the reindeer. Preparations for the day's journey began. The caravan slowly advanced toward the town. They halted at a small distance. Katya decided to first move the reindeer herd across, but keeping them from straying too close to the town would be difficult. He couldn't risk using the camp dogs like usual. Their barking might alert the man-eaters. There was only one option. Break the herd into smaller groups and move them one by one across the narrow strip of solid ground between the town and the hillside. Artyom and Yegor stood guard near the outskirts with their rifles raised. Katya, Ukik, and a group of women began herding the reindeer across. The town remained eerily quiet. Not a single sound. No movement. No sign of life. It was late afternoon when the last group made it over. Katya exhaled. Now we just have to move the sleds. We'll be far away from the town before the sun sets, he told Ukik. Ukik nodded. If we call a halt by midnight, we'll be at a safe distance. Katya muzzled the camp dogs with pieces of rope and tied them together in a line behind one of the baylocks. The dogs whined in protest. Quiet, he ordered, frowning. It's only for a few hours. He wondered where Smokey was. Hopefully she wouldn't pick up the town's scent and wander off to investigate. That dog had grown too bold. Ever since she fought the man-eater in the village, she'd lost her fear. That could get her killed. Everyone had their spears ready. The caravan inched forward, hugging the hillside. The reindeer herd was now 2 miles ahead, safely hidden behind a highland plateau. Eyes stayed glued to the town. Kiara sat on one of the sleds, binoculars pressed to her face. She scanned for movement. Nothing. They had reached the narrowest section of the crossing. The outer buildings loomed barely 50 feet away. Ukik put his fingers to his lips and signaled for silence. Artyom walked at the front of the caravan. Yegor brought up the rear. Katya moved back and forth along the line, adjusting the reins and watching the dogs. And then it happened. A sharp, loud crack split the air like lightning. Everyone froze, heads whipping around in confusion. But Katya knew the sound immediately, and his stomach dropped. A baylock roller had snapped. The professor clenched his teeth in frustration. He had completely forgotten that he had loosened the ropes on his baylock's rollers. He viewed the broken roller, calculating the damage. My plan has backfired, he thought worriedly. After Katya had been ordered to live with the reindeer by a tuk-tuk, no one had inspected the baylock. The professor had been pleased about that. He had expected the roller to snap right away. But the wood, carefully chosen and well-crafted, had lasted longer than anticipated. His entire plan had hinged on the roller breaking early, so that a tuk-tuk could be conveniently killed during the delay. But the man-eaters had taken care of that for him. He clasped his head in both hands and looked toward the village, his worry mounting. The snap had been loud. Too loud. Had it alerted anything inside the town? He watched as Katya and Ukik examined the damage. The entire group had gathered, forming a nervous circle. Can we fix it? Artyom asked in a whisper. Ukik shook his head. It's snapped clean. We'll need to make a new roller. How long will that take? Yegor asked. Ukik shrugged. At least a day, if we can find a suitable tree nearby. But we've seen nothing but bushes for the last 2 days, the professor argued sharply. Katya was quiet for a moment, then spoke. We have to leave the baylock behind. And where exactly is my group supposed to sleep? The professor snapped. Outside, Katya replied calmly. Take everything from inside and load it onto the sleds. Katya's right, said Arnak. There's no other choice. Katya began detaching the broken baylock from the caravan line. Help me with the ropes, he told Ukik, who stepped forward to assist. The group stood watching, eyes darting uneasily toward the town every few seconds. Spread out, Artyom said softly. Be ready with the spears. Rob peered at the empty buildings. Doesn't look like anyone's in there. We saw tracks, Kiara said. There are man-eaters inside. Rob looked at her confused. We? You were there? Kiara said nothing, raising the binoculars to her eyes again. The professor's group had still been asleep when she and Katya had gone scouting. I asked you something, Rob said sharply, voice rising. Hush, you fool, Artyom snapped. Can we talk about this later? Kiara said, annoyed. No, I'm not staying quiet. Rob's voice cut through the tension. Yegor grabbed him. What madness is this? Shut your mouth. Calm down, everyone, the professor interjected. Rob shoved Yegor off. Why were you with that dog? He shouted at Kiara. Ukik looked up from the ropes, his voice cold. Careful how you speak to Katya, boy. Katya could feel the situation spiraling out of control. It wasn't her fault. I asked her to come with me. This lover's quarrel will get us all killed, Artyom spat. The professor scowled. You stay away from my group. Kiara whirled toward him, furious. You don't get to decide who I spend time with. Then it happened. A low grunt echoed from the town. Everyone froze. The window, Oranon stammered, pointing a trembling finger. From the shattered window of a dilapidated hut, a face stared back at them. It was a man-eater, huge, its pale eyes locked onto them as it grunted, once, twice again. It's calling its friends, Yegor said grimly. So there's more. You mugs have awakened them, Artyom growled. Now fight for your lives. Chapter 14. The children huddled together in fear inside one of the baylocks. Blood-curdling roars echoed from the town, each one sending chills down their spines. Upu had been put in charge of watching over them. There are more of us, Upu said with forced confidence. We will win. But people will die, whispered a little girl beside her. Upu closed her eyes, straining to focus on the sounds outside. The howls, the wind, the heartbeat-like silence in between. Maybe, she admitted quietly. We shall soon know. Outside, Artyom and Yegor stood with rifles raised, pointed squarely at the town. Katya, Ukik, and the women of the tribe had formed a line, spears at the ready. The professor's group stood beside them, forming a haphazard circle, tense and uncertain. Rob, no longer arguing, stood with his fist clenched on his spear, eyes twitching, hunger for violence simmering just below the surface. The professor addressed his group calmly, but coldly. When one of these filthy maggots gets close, we surround it. Then we strike, all at once, from every direction. Everyone stood still, breath held. The grunts and roars from the town had suddenly ceased. Why don't they attack? Katya muttered. These are the clever ones, Artyom growled. They're planning something. Kiara, crouched low, scanned the town through the binoculars. One is watching us from behind that tall building on the right, she said urgently. Can you get a shot? Katya asked the Russian soldiers. Artyom shook his head. No, I need a clean shot. I can barely see it. It's gone, Kiara said moments later, her voice dropping. Katya looked up at the sky. Roughly 3 hours of daylight remained. He silently prayed the creatures would attack soon. Fighting them in the dark would be nearly impossible. The weight dragged on, heavy and suffocating. 15 long, silent minutes passed, but still no attack. At last, Artyom and Yegor lowered their rifles. We're dealing with a very clever, strategic thinking bunch of creatures, Artyom said. They're waiting for nightfall, or for us to make a mistake. Yegor nodded grimly. There can't be many of them. If they were in large numbers, they'd have already charged. They'd know we couldn't handle more than 3 or 4. Katya and Ukik turned their attention back to the broken baylock, working quickly to detach it from the caravan line. Are the reindeer safe? Oranon asked, his voice tense. Ukik nodded. They should be. These monsters will come for us first. Untie the dogs, brother, Katya said to Oranon. We'll need them. Oranon ran to the dogs and began removing the muzzles. Katya turned back, freeing the final ropes from the broken baylock. Then he paused. The dogs weren't watching the town. They were all looking at the hill that rose beside the caravan. Katya's brow furrowed. Something wasn't right. He turned to Kiara, still scanning the town. Do you see any movement? She lowered the binoculars slightly. I haven't seen anything for a while now. A chill ran through Katya. Could it be? He grabbed his spear and stepped forward, surveying the town. After the roller had broken, everyone had focused their attention on the town. No one had watched their flanks. A man-eater could have exited the town from the rear, crossed the swamp, and then circled around, approaching from the left or right, climbing the hill behind them. If that had happened, the attack wouldn't come from the town at all. It would come from behind, from the hill, and no one was watching the hill. He turned his back to the town facing the slope. It was a gradual incline, dotted with low shrubs and patches of grass. Not enough vegetation to hide a full-size man-eater. Then he saw it, a flicker of movement, just for an instant, at the top of the hill. He narrowed his eyes and stared. Nothing, just wind-stirred grass and stillness. But he was sure of it. Something had moved. Something had ducked down. A man-eater, peering from the top of the hill, watching, waiting. Katya's breath caught in his throat. They had been outplayed. "Quick," said Katya urgently. "They are going to attack from the hilltop." The group looked at Katya, confused. "Be ready," he shouted, raising his spear. Everyone turned toward the hill. Artyom and Yegor followed his gaze, surprised, but instinctively pointed their rifles in the same direction. "Why would—" the professor began, but his voice caught in his throat. Three figures burst over the crest of the hill, leaping down and sprinting toward them. "Here they come!" Katya screamed. Artyom and Yegor immediately opened fire. Gunshots rang out across the valley, but the man-eaters weren't charging straight. They zigzagged down the slope, making them difficult targets. They were halfway down the hill and still untouched. "Guard the children!" Katya yelled at Ukik. The baylock housing the children sat directly in the path of the approaching monsters. Artyom fired again. One of the creatures took a shot to the head. It crumpled mid-run, tumbling across the dirt until it lay still. Dust rose around the lifeless form. Two remained. The dogs barked wildly, their cries a strange blend of fear and excitement. Another bullet slammed into a man-eater's chest. It stumbled, then surged back to its feet, unfazed by the gaping wound. With terrifying speed, the last two closed the distance and launched themselves into the midst of the spear-wielding defenders. Artyom and Yegor ceased firing. There were too many people in the way now. They couldn't risk hitting their own. The dogs barked and circled, but hesitated from attacking. Then Blood sprang forward. Snarling, he lunged at one of the man-eaters. The other dogs hesitated a moment, then followed his lead. In a blur of motion and fury, they descended on the beast. It fought viciously, grabbing one dog and lifting it into the air. With immense force, it crushed the animal in its grip, choking it to death. But the others dragged it down. Blood clamped onto its throat as the man-eater thrashed beneath a mass of snapping jaws. The final man-eater charged at Katya. Katya's spear met it mid-air, sinking deep into its chest. It fell but rose again quickly, only to be struck by a wave of spears. The tribe surrounded the creature, striking it again and again. Blood sprayed from open wounds, bits of flesh flying through the air as the beast roared in agony, clawing for the spears, desperate. "The head!" Katya shouted. "Aim for the head!" Rob hurled his spear. It spun through the air with deadly precision and smashed into the creature's face, the sharp point shattering its cheekbone. The man-eater staggered, barely conscious. Arnak stepped forward and, with a roar of her own, drove her spear into its skull. The creature collapsed. It was over. Mark and Elvis let out victorious whoops. "We've won!" Rob shouted, ecstatic. Cheers erupted from the professor's group. The tension, the fear, the arguments, forgotten. For a moment, they were united. Artyom and Yegor grinned. Ornan embraced his mother. The children peeked from the baylock, eyes wide with relief. Katya walked quietly toward the dog that had been killed. He knelt, gently patting its side. His heart was heavy. The joy of victory was there, but muted. A life had been lost. It was a price they had to pay to survive. They had fought off a man-eater attack. Katya exhaled deeply. Looking over the jubilant group, he smiled faintly. "Now they know there is hope," he thought. "They know we can fight these things." He turned and saw Rob embracing Kiara. The earlier tension between them had vanished. "How was my throw?" Rob asked, beaming. Kiara grinned. "It did the job." Overcome with excitement, Rob kissed her passionately. "Too bad there are no trees around," he whispered with a wink. "Or else," Kiara laughed, "it can wait." The smile disappeared from Katya's face. Without a word, he picked up a shovel and walked away to bury the fallen dog. During the next 4 days, the group didn't encounter any more man-eaters. They remained cautious, keeping a watchful eye on their surroundings at all times. Yet a quiet confidence had settled over them. They had faced their worst fears, been attacked by monsters, and they had survived. The snow had melted completely now. The caravan moved steadily across open plains. Spirits were high. They were heading southwest, following a rarely used mud track. Artyom and Yegor knew this region well. With their guidance, the group wove between hills and skirting swamps, avoiding the worst terrain. The days had grown warmer, and the children, full of energy, splashed into the marshes every chance they got, much to their mother's dismay. Katya remained quiet and distant. After Kiara had kissed him, he had thought that things would be different between them. Maybe they would kiss again. Maybe she was in love with him. But each night, it was Rob who lay with her. Since the high school group's baylock had broken and been left behind, they now slept out in the open. Katya dreaded sleeping near the campfire, where the others gathered. He didn't want to see Rob and Kiara together. And Rob, he knew how Katya felt. Whenever Katya was nearby, Rob would make a point of being more intimate with her, holding her close, touching her, as if to prove a point. It wasn't just Rob. Katya had noticed the way Artyom and Yegor leered at Kiara. Even the professor watched her with a lingering gaze. Katya spent his evenings near the reindeer herd, away from the firelight. He sat stroking Smokey's head. She had finally returned from her wanderings and hadn't left his side since. She'd been overjoyed to see him again. Katya sat in silence, lost in thought, replaying the past few days over and over. The sled ride to the town, Kiara's head resting on his shoulder, the unexpected kiss. She felt something for me, he told himself. That much is certain. But if that were true, why was she still with Rob? Does she pity me, he wondered? Was that what the kiss meant? Whatever it was between them, Katya needed clarity. He couldn't live in this uncertain space anymore. He needed a resolution, and he needed it soon. He looked up at the night sky. The moon was absent, but the stars shone with startling brightness. He wondered if his father was up there somewhere. Can he see me now? Smokey lifted her head and sniffed at the wind. From the campfire, Katya could hear laughter. Someone singing a song, voices echoing in celebration and relief. And yet, sitting under the brilliant stars, Katya had never felt more alone. The sounds of cheer did nothing to warm him. A weight pressed on his chest, silent and immovable. Despite the safety, despite the victory, despite the laughter and light, he had never felt so miserable in his life. Chapter 15. The next evening, the caravan spotted the gulag in the distance. It was a sprawling encampment, far larger than anything Katya had ever seen. He stared at it in amazement. The outer perimeter was a collapsing barrier of barbed and meshed wire, propped up by thick wooden beams. We tried to fix it up as best as we could, said Artyom. There were noticeable gaps in the barbed wire fence, and Katya immediately questioned whether this place could truly withstand a man-eater attack. Behind that flimsy barrier, however, stood a sturdier wall made of tall wooden planks, forming a wide circle around the camp. Though it too showed signs of disrepair, Katya was relieved to see no obvious breaches. As the caravan approached, two men in Russian army uniforms ran toward them. Each carried an AK-47. The dogs began barking furiously, growling as they surged forward. Katya had to shout to keep them from attacking the newcomers. The soldiers' faces were hollow, drawn with fatigue and hunger, but they embraced Artyom and Yegor with wide grins and rough enthusiasm. "Hope you brought food," said one of the men, eyes darting nervously. "Yes," Yegor replied. "Any attacks?" Artyom asked. "Nothing since we got here." Their eyes drifted to the members of the caravan, inspecting the tribe and eyeing the high school group with a flicker of suspicion. Then their attention shifted to the reindeer herd trailing behind. "Who are they?" one asked, frowning. "They're reindeer herders," said Artyom. "They're here to help." The men nodded, then opened the gates. The caravan filed inside. Inside the gulag, 8 men waited. All were gaunt and unkempt. The last of their food rations had run out weeks ago. They had survived by hunting sables in the pine forest to the south, barely scraping by. Surrounding the gulag were wide, open grasslands that stretched toward the horizon. Moss and lichen blanketed the ground in abundance. There would be plenty for the reindeer to graze on. Katya chose to keep the herd just outside the gates, where they could feed safely for weeks. There were no swarms of mosquitoes here either, and Katya felt confident the animals would thrive, at least until the weather turned warm again. But Smokey refused to enter. Katya called out again and again, but the dog merely barked once and dashed toward the distant pine forest. Katya sighed. She's impossible. The other dogs, however, followed the caravan inside, ears alert, eyes wary. They growled softly at the soldiers, pacing uneasily. Katya walked through the camp with Blood at his side while the women began preparing the evening meal. He took in the layout, the mood. The soldiers were not welcoming. They were grim, withdrawn, uninterested in the tribe. Two men took up guard at the gate. The others sat together inside a large shed, whispering in low tones. Katya felt uneasy. He wondered how things would develop. He knew that the tribe was now the only source of food for the Russian soldiers. Will they join us when we head north? He doubted it. But at the same time, they won't want to lose their food source either. But the other tribe members seemed relieved to have strong walls and armed men around them. After months of wandering the wilderness, where danger lurked behind every shadow, the illusion of safety brought comfort. The sense of dread they had lived with for so long began to lift, if only slightly. Scattered across the gulag were large empty sheds. Katya looked at them uneasily. These were once the prison barracks, dark, soulless structures where hundreds had been crammed like cattle. Even after all these years, a heavy sense of despair and forgotten suffering clung to the place. He had heard stories. During Soviet times, many Nenets had been dragged into such camps, forced to abandon their nomadic ways and labor for the state. Their freedom had died here. In the center of the gulag lay a stone quarry. Steel tracks extended from the mine to a massive, crumbling outhouse, where shattered carts sat motionless, frozen in time. Katya imagined the prisoners, thin, coughing, starving, hauling loads of stone through snow and pain. Their footsteps, their cries, their suffering still echoed in the air, faint but undeniable. He turned his attention to the wooden wall surrounding the camp. It looked solid at a glance, but Katya inspected it closely, running his fingers across the aged planks. It was sturdy enough to keep people in, or out, but he doubted it could hold against a coordinated man-eater assault. Not for long. He made his way back to the main gate, where the caravan was still stationed. The soldiers had opened a second shed for the tribe. It was a long, rectangular structure, no partitions, no windows, just high ceilings and 4 damp, moldy walls. Katya wrinkled his nose in disgust. The air was musty, stagnant. Most of the high school group had already settled in, chatting and trying to make the best of it. Ukik had gone outside to check on the reindeer. Oranon was lying on the floor, his wolf coat rolled under his head like a pillow. Katya sat beside him. "How do you like this place?" he asked. "I'm just glad we're somewhere safe," Oranon replied with a faint smile. Katya nodded, placing his hand against the shed wall. "It won't be easy for anything to break into this place." His gaze drifted to Kiara, who was talking to Timothy and Lillian. "I have to speak to her. I can't go on like this." Oranon looked peaceful. "I'll finally be able to sleep tonight," he said. Katya exhaled. "But what about tomorrow?" "What do you mean?" Oranon asked. "They might not want us to leave." "We help them. They'll want to help us too. Some of them might even come with us. We'll have soldiers on our side." Katya shook his head slowly. "Not everyone is like us, brother." Oranon closed his eyes. "You worry too much. Now let me sleep." Katya sat in silence, staring at the ceiling, and still the unease in his gut would not go away. The soldiers devoured the dried reindeer meat and walrus soup like starved animals. With each bite, they seemed to come back to life, laughing, slapping each other on the back, and congratulating Artyom and Yegor for returning with supplies. Their mood turned raucous, loud, and crude, filled with constant sexual jokes and vulgar remarks. Katya watched them carefully, uneasy. He had tried to start conversations with a few of the soldiers, but they had either ignored him or brushed him off. What worried him more was how their eyes had lingered on the reindeer herd outside the gulag gates. Surprised, calculating. They had commented more than once on how large the herd was. A lot of food, Katya thought grimly. He knew he had to stay alert. After the meal, the Russian soldiers and the tribe retreated to their separate sheds. The professor remained near the gate, playing cards with a group of soldiers. Katya, unable to sleep, sat silently in the corner of the tribe's shed, deep in thought. He longed to lie beside a fire, with the dogs curled up around him like before. But the Russians had forbidden open flames at night, saying the light might attract passing man-eaters. The dogs had been on edge all evening. They snarled constantly at the soldiers. One nearly bit a man who tried to kick it away. Furious, the soldiers demanded the animals be removed. Ukik had to gather all the dogs into the shed. Blood was sent outside the gulag to guard the reindeer, and Smokey was somewhere out there. Katya tried to rest but couldn't. Something about the place gnawed at him. The cold, the dampness, the history of suffering that clung to the gulag. It all weighed on him. He tossed and turned, unable to settle. Suddenly, the shed door creaked open. The professor poked his head inside. "Mark, Rob, Elvis," he called. "Help me move some wooden beams." "At this hour?" Rob groaned. "Why?" "Because I lost a bet," the professor snapped. "Card game." There were grumbles from the three boys. "Why not in the morning?" Elvis muttered sleepily. "Get moving," the professor barked, disappearing again. Katya watched the boys stumble out into the dark, yawning and cursing. He knew sleep wouldn't come. The prison camp felt cursed. He needed air, space. He decided to bed down with the reindeer outside the gates. It would feel more natural. As he reached the shed door, a thought struck him. I should talk to Kiara. He turned back. Most of the others were asleep, huddled under their coats. He walked quietly to where Kiara was lying and crouched down beside her. "Hey," she whispered. "Can't sleep," Katya asked her. She shook her head. "I need to talk to you about something," he said. She sat up, brushing hair from her face. "What is it?" Katya looked around, then leaned closer. "Can we go outside?" Chapter 16. The moon was shining brightly, casting a pale, eerie glow over the gulag. Katya and Kiara walked in silence toward the old stone mine at the center of the camp. In the distance, they could hear the Russian soldiers singing gleefully, their voices rising in drunken revelry. "They seem happy," Kiara remarked softly. Katya nodded. They reached the edge of the mine and looked down into the massive circular depression. It was a sheer drop into blackness, the bottom lost in shadow. Katya swallowed hard, gathering his courage. "This is not easy for me to say." Kiara turned toward him, waiting. "I love you," he blurted out. "I know," Kiara replied, "and I love you." But something in her tone didn't match the words. She didn't seem pleased. Katya frowned, confused. He tried to speak again. He had rehearsed this conversation 1,000 times, imagined every word. But now that the moment had come, the emotions choked him. Then why?" Kiara cut him off. "It doesn't matter what we feel for each other. It's not meant to be. You know that." "Is it Rob?" "Yes. But you told me once you don't love him." "I don't," she said quietly. "But that doesn't matter." Katya ran his hands through his hair in frustration. "I still don't understand." "Don't you see?" Kiara said. "He's not the same person anymore. The only thing holding him together, the only thing keeping him remotely sane, is me. If I leave him, he'll lose it. If he sees me with you, it will break him. And the professor's group, his group, they're already on the brink. I don't want your family hurt." Katya's voice grew sharp. "Then why did you kiss me?" Kiara looked away. "I shouldn't have." His heart burned. "I wish you never held my hand, never talked to me, never met me. You should have never come into my life." Tears welled up in her eyes. "I'm sorry. You should never have saved us that day. Your life would have been better." She turned and walked away, heading back toward the shed. Katya followed, his shoulders slumped, heart breaking with every step. He saw her wiping her tears. He wanted to run to her, hold her, kiss her, tell her none of this mattered. But it did. She had said it herself. It's not meant to be. As they neared the shed, the professor's group appeared, stepping into the moonlight. They carried spears and had smeared blood across their faces in strange patterns. "There you are, beautiful," the professor leered at Kiara. "We've been looking for you." "What do you want?" Kiara asked, irritated. Katya stopped in the shadow of a nearby ruined building. He didn't want another confrontation with Rob. He just wanted to be left alone. He decided to wait until they dispersed before heading back. But something felt off. The professor's group had painted their faces in blood again. Katya tensed. Things are going to get bad. They lit cigarettes and passed them around. Katya frowned. Where had they gotten those? Since when do you smoke? Kiara asked Rob. Just started, he said, offering her one from an open pack. She refused. Did the soldiers give it to you? Rob hesitated. I made a deal. Cigarettes in exchange for... The professor interrupted with a twisted grin. It's not going to be too bad. You'll enjoy it. Enjoy what? Kiara asked warily. Rob looked at her. We've been talking to the Russians. Things are going to change now. The tribe cannot leave the gulag. There's shortage of labor, women, food. Everyone has to contribute to the group now, for the common good. You're no exception. I don't understand, she said, narrowing her eyes. You have to sleep with all of us, the professor said coldly. Kiara laughed bitterly. Is this some kind of sick joke? I'm too tired for your nonsense. It has to be done, Rob said, voice low. Kiara looked at him and saw the truth in his eyes. This was no joke. The Russians and us four, Mark added with a sinister grin. The professor licked his lips. I've been waiting a long, long time to be inside you. Kiara recoiled. What's wrong with you? I'm sorry, Rob muttered. Let's take her to the Russian, said the professor. Suddenly, the three of them grabbed her. Stunned, Kiara fought back, struggling to break free. Rob seized her hands, his face twisting in rage. He slapped her hard across the face. No one's going to help you, he snarled. You betrayed me. You wanted that savage boy. I'll give you something better. Drunk Russian soldiers. Katya moved. There was no time to think. He rushed from the shadows, dagger drawn. The professor saw him first. Kill him, he screamed. Rob spun around, launching his spear. Katya dodged just in time. The blade grazed his shoulder, tearing through cloth and skin. His dagger slipped from his hand. Mark and Elvis lunged at him with their spears. Unarmed, Katya danced backward, barely dodging the lethal tips as they thrust again and again. Help! Katya screamed, his voice echoing through the icy gulag night, hoping the tribe would hear and come to his aid. The professor grinned, holding Kiara by the hair. Your friends are locked in the shed, he sneered, and your wolf is outside the camp. Rob scrambled toward his fallen spear. Katya's heart pounded. If Rob got to it and threw, he might not miss this time. Katya had to act, now. But there was no way to get past Mark or Elvis. Please stop, Kiara cried out, desperate. I'll do whatever you want. Just don't hurt him. It's too late for that, the professor snickered. Mark lunged. Katya twisted away and grabbed hold of the spear. But before he could rip it from Mark's hands, Elvis slammed him in the ribs with his own weapon. The blow didn't pierce, but it sent Katya sprawling to the ground. Pain shot through him. This is it, he thought grimly. No, screamed Kiara. He's mine, Rob shouted, gripping his weapon, eyes locked on his fallen rival. Katya lay on the ground, dazed. The world slowed. He felt the cold breeze kiss his cheek, sweat trickling down his back, his fists curling into the mud. So this is what it feels like. Before death. The professor had won. They would kill him, imprison his family, and Kiara, his beloved Kiara, would be... Rob raised his spear, ready to strike. A wave of fury surged through Katya. I saved these people, he thought. And now they're going to murder me? He clenched the mud tighter, rage boiling to the surface. Rob moved to throw. Katya acted. With a sudden burst of motion, he flung the clump of mud in his hand straight at Rob's face. At the exact moment Rob released the spear, the flying dirt hit him squarely in the eyes. Rob flinched, just enough. The spear struck the ground inches from Katya's head, vibrating with force. Katya rolled quickly, grabbing Rob's fallen weapon as Mark and Elvis lunged. He parried their blows with desperate energy. Instead of stabbing, Katya spun the spear above his head and struck Mark hard in the skull. Mark collapsed with a groan, clutching his head. Throw it at him, the professor barked. Elvis hesitated, now the only one standing. Seeing Rob and Mark out of the fight, fear flickered in his eyes. He hurled his spear. but missed. The weapon sailed harmlessly into the darkness. Katya countered swiftly, slamming his spear into Elvis's shoulder. Elvis crumpled, howling in pain. Rob turned and fled toward the Russian soldier's shed. The professor, realizing the tide had turned, shoved Kiara to the ground and stepped back. "The Russians are going to kill you all," he shrieked, turning to follow Rob. Katya hesitated for a heartbeat. "Should I do it?" The professor was running. There would be no second chance. He took a deep breath and pointed his spear. It had to be done. Katya aimed and hurled the spear with all his strength. It cut through the air and drove into the professor's back. The man stumbled forward, eyes wide, as the bloody tip emerged from his chest. He stared at it, stunned, then collapsed face first into the snow. Dead. Katya raced to Kiara. He dropped to his knees, pulling her into a crushing embrace. "Are you hurt?" he asked urgently. She shook her head, still trembling. "We have to help the others." Together they ran to the tribe's shed. A massive rusted iron lock sealed the door. Katya slammed the spear against it, gritting his teeth in frustration. Inside, the dogs barked wildly. In the distance, the Russian soldiers had stopped singing. Shouts rose from their quarters. They had heard the noises. "Is it you, Katya?" came Ukik's voice from behind the door. "We have been trapped by the Russians." "Ukik," Katya gasped. "I can't break the lock." "Listen, you need to escape," Ukik urged, voice tense. "Not without everyone," Katya shouted, pounding the lock again and again. "Katya, you need to escape," Arnak said calmly from inside. "Run!" Kiara looked behind them. The Russians had lit torches and were beginning to stream out of their shed. Katya stared at the lock. The spear wasn't strong enough to break it. There had to be another way. His fingers felt along the heavy hinges of the massive door, searching for weakness. A gunshot rang out. The bullet smashed into the wall beside him. The Russians were aiming now. "We have to leave," Kiara cried out. "I'll be back," Katya shouted through the door. They sprinted behind the shed just as a second shot cracked the air behind them. Katya knew there was only one way out of the gulag, the main gate. Outside the camp, Smokey and Blood had started barking, sensing danger. They'd heard the gunfire, but the main gate was shut, and the dogs couldn't help them from the other side. Katya and Kiara darted toward the mine, then looped back through the broken-down buildings, keeping low, heading in the direction of the gate. As they passed the edge of the mine, Katya picked up 2 stones and hurled them inside. The clatter echoed in the darkness. It worked. The Russians turned toward the sound and began moving in that direction. The glow of their torches revealed their exact positions, flickering through the dark, giving away every step. Katya and Kiara stuck to the shadows, slipping between ruined structures until they reached the main gate. A lone soldier was guarding it. He held an AK-47, his stance tense, eyes scanning the camp. Katya crouched behind a shattered water tank, heart thudding. If they could get past this one man, they could escape. But the soldier wasn't careless. He faced inward, toward the camp, weapon raised and alert. There was no chance of sneaking up behind him. Then Katya heard it. The shouts from the mine were growing louder. The soldiers had realized their mistake. They were heading back, rushing toward the gate to cut off any chance of escape. Outside the gate, Smokey and Blood were barking furiously. They pressed their heads between the thick wooden beams, desperate to force their way in. They know we're in danger, Katya thought. The soldier guarding the gate glanced nervously behind him at the snarling dogs. He shifted on his feet. Then suddenly he turned, raising his weapon toward the animals. Katya didn't wait. The instant the man's back was exposed, Katya sprang forward. Just as the soldier was about to fire, Katya smashed the hilt of his dagger into the man's skull. The soldier gave a low groan and crumpled to the ground. Katya snatched the gun from his limp hands as Kiara rushed to unbolt the gate. Behind them, the soldiers were coming. Katya gripped the AK-47 tightly. He had a gun. He had his dogs. Can I fight them? No, these were trained soldiers. He wouldn't stand a chance. He needed a different plan. They bolted outside the camp and raced toward the reindeer. Katya called for the dogs to follow. Katya and Kiara dropped to the snow and crouched low between the reindeer, breathing hard. The dogs crouched beside them, silent now, alert. The soldiers reached the gate and stopped. If they came into the dark, spreading out to search, Katya knew he'd have the advantage. The dogs were hunters. In the shadows they could strike, silent and deadly. The Russians began arguing, their angry voices drifting through the cold night air. "Let's kill them!" one soldier roared, staring at the unconscious guard. "Kill the boy!" another sneered. "I want the girl alive. I'll have her before I kill her." Katya's stomach turned. "You fools!" Yegor snapped. "The boy has a wolf. In the dark, it could come from anywhere. For your throat." "They can't run for long," said Artyom. "They have no food. We'll track them in the morning. We still have fuel for the snowmobiles." Grunts of approval followed. "I wanted that girl tonight," one soldier grumbled. "You shall have a girl tonight," Yegor said with a wicked laugh. "Just not that one." Katya and Kiara trudged across the swampy, wet ground under the cold light of the moon. Smoky and Blood padded silently at their heels. Ahead of them lay the pine forest, the only cover visible near the gulag. Neither of them spoke. Both were locked in their own tangled thoughts and turbulent emotions. Katya's mind was consumed with fear for his family. He knew what the Russian soldiers were capable of. Anything. How can I save them? The question gnawed at him like hunger. It seemed impossible. The soldiers would be on high alert now. The only way back into the gulag was through the main gate, and that would be guarded without a doubt. Fatigue suddenly washed over Katya like a crashing wave. His legs felt heavy. His chest ached with helplessness. It struck him hard like a punch to the gut. There's no way I can save the tribe. His eyes drifted to the forest, dark and still in the distance, and then he stopped walking. "What's wrong?" Kiara asked gently. Katya sank to the ground. "I can't do this," he whispered. Kiara didn't answer immediately. She looked at him with quiet concern, then sat beside him and wrapped her arms around his shoulders. He felt her warmth against him, the softness of her long hair brushing his cheek. Katya drew in a shaky breath. "What's the point of running?" he said, his voice flat. "The ground's wet. Our tracks are easy to follow. By morning, they'll hunt us down in the forest. They have guns and they'll be shooting to kill." Kiara nodded silently. "We never should have come here," Katya muttered. "Everything's lost. Even if we somehow escape, where will we find food? We'd have to travel south for days to find game in the forest. And my family, will I ever see them again?" She turned his face toward hers. "In the end, things always work out," she said. Katya's eyes darkened. "Not this time. There's no hope." "There's always hope, Katya, as long as we're alive." Kiara stood and gently pulled him up. "We will fight," she said, her voice calm but resolute, "till our last breath." Katya held her hands, still unconvinced, the weight of despair pressing heavily on his chest. And then they heard it. A distant sound echoed from the pine forest ahead. Katya froze. He looked at Kiara. They were both thinking the same thing. It had sounded like a roar. They stood still, listening intently. Katya hoped, prayed, it was just a bear, or a lone wolf. Anything but what he feared. The only thing that could possibly make their nightmare worse was if they now had to fight off man-eaters. And then it came again, a cacophony of guttural grunts and low, echoing howls. "It's a man-eater pack," Katya said grimly, raising the rifle in his hand. Kiara closed her eyes for a moment, focusing on the sounds. "And a very large one," she murmured. Katya's heart pounded. Just seconds ago, despair had held him in its grip, but now adrenaline surged through him. His survival instincts kicked in like fire. He had a gun. He had his two best dogs. Could they fight them off? He glanced at the weapon in his hand, suddenly wondering how many bullets were left in the magazine. "From the sounds," Katya said slowly, "I think there must be at least 25. It was a horrifying number. Even with the rifle, he couldn't hope to shoot more than 3 or 4 before they were overwhelmed. He turned to Kiara. With man-eaters ahead and bloodthirsty soldiers behind, she was smiling. "What?" he asked, staring at her. She glanced back at the gulag behind them, torches flickering in the distance. Her eyes gleamed. "I have an idea," she said. Chapter 17. Katya cooed. From the pine forest came a series of deep, guttural roars, and then silence. He and Kiara knew the man-eaters were now stalking, drawn toward the sound, investigating what they had heard. Without a word, they sprinted across the swampy, sodden ground, racing back toward the gulag. Katya knew the man-eaters could move fast, much faster than humans. They would have no trouble outrunning them. Every few seconds, he and Kiara glanced over their shoulders, hearts hammering. In the pale moonlight, they finally saw them. Figures began to emerge from the shadowy edge of the pine forest. Roughly 24 monstrous creatures, lumbering, lean, and silent, broke from the trees. Katya cooed again. The creatures picked up speed, heading directly for the sound. "I think they've seen us," Kiara said, breathless. Katya turned and saw the man-eaters spreading out, forming a hunting arc. "I hope this works," he thought desperately. Ahead was a small rise in the terrain. Katya knew that once they crossed the undulation, they'd be hidden from the man-eaters' view until the creatures crested the slope themselves. Timing is everything. They pushed themselves harder, crested the rise, and jumped down on the other side. The gulag loomed ahead now. The gates were shut, and 2 guards stood behind them, holding torches and rifles. "Wait here," Kiara whispered, pulling Katya to a stop. She turned to look behind them. "Let them get closer." A tense minute passed. Then Kiara gave a slight nod. Katya cooed one last time. Behind them, grunts echoed in the night. The man-eaters were closing in. The guards had heard the strange cry as well and raised their guns, scanning the darkness. "The fools have come back," one soldier laughed. "Be careful. The boy's got a gun," the other warned. Katya and Kiara took off again, darting away from the main gate, moving toward the gulag's flank. "Come here," Katya hissed to Smokey and Blood, who were growling lowly now, their noses picking up the familiar stench of death. They rushed to a narrow gap in the barbed wire fence and slipped through, crawling silently. Once inside, they crouched near the wooden beams, hidden in the shadows, hearts pounding. And then they saw them. The man-eaters crested the rise and stopped. Grunting softly, they had seen the gulag. The attack didn't happen at the main gate. The creatures moved silently, spreading out around the camp like a tightening noose. Katya and Kiara sat tensely as the man-eaters crept past their hiding spot, their grotesque forms vanishing into the darkness as they encircled the gulag. "Are they going to try to smash through the wall?" Katya wondered. He knew the perimeter wall was high and built to withstand force, but as he peeked cautiously from their hiding place, what he saw chilled him. The man-eaters, after slipping through the wire fence, were crouching low, allowing others to climb onto their backs. "They're stacking up," Katya whispered. Kiara watched in awe. The creatures were forming a living pyramid. Standing atop one another, the higher ones could now grab the top of the wall, scrambling up with startling ease. From there, they pulled others up. "They're clever," Kiara whispered, eyes wide. Katya nodded grimly. "The Russian soldiers say the bigger the pack, the faster they learn and adapt." "And this is a big pack," Kiara murmured. Suddenly, gunshots shattered the silence. Shouts rang out from within the gulag. AK-47 fire crackled through the night. The battle had begun. Katya knew the soldiers were experienced, seasoned by many bloody encounters with the man-eaters. They would resist fiercely, for a while at least. Slipping from their hiding place, Katya and Kiara moved cautiously toward the main gate. Katya held the AK-47 tightly, ready to shoot anything that moved, soldier or beast. But the gate was unguarded. Katya raised the rifle and blasted the hinges. The gate groaned and swung open. They sprinted through and raced toward the shed where the tribe was being held. Gunfire echoed through the air. Near the camp walls, Russian soldiers were firing from cover, ducking between buildings. The man-eaters had scattered, taking positions on rooftops and behind structures, stalking their targets with a terrifying intelligence. They avoided direct lines of fire, waiting to pounce from above. The chaos was deafening. When Katya and Kiara reached the shed, the dogs inside were barking wildly. A man-eater was hammering the door, trying to break through. Katya took aim and fired. A burst of bullets shredded the beast's head. It dropped instantly. "Stay back!" Katya yelled through the door. He fired again, this time at the lock. The shattering metal gave way, and he kicked the door open. "What is happening?" Orinon cried, panic in his voice. "We have to run," Katya said. The tribe poured out, dragging the dogs with them. They dashed toward the main gate. A man-eater roared from the roof of a nearby shed. Katya whirled and fired. The beast toppled, riddled with bullets. But that was the last of his bullets. The magazine was empty. Katya threw the gun aside, heart pounding, praying no more creatures would come for them now. They ran through the open gate, finally free of the gulag. "Where's the professor?" Arnak asked breathlessly. "We can't leave him behind." Katya hesitated. I... they... they all died in the attack," Kiara said, her voice firm. Ukik turned to glance back at the camp. "Our caravan is still inside. All our supplies..." "It's too late now," Kiara said. "We can't go back." Without another word, they ran toward the pine forest. In the distance near the tree line, the reindeer herd had gathered. The animals had panicked at the scent and sound of the man-eaters and had fled instinctively to the forest's edge. The group didn't stop running until the cold trees swallowed them. By the time they reached the forest, the gunfire had completely died out. Only the distant roars remained. Everyone understood what that meant. "The pack must have grown even larger now," Ukik whispered. The group turned to look behind them, toward the gulag. It was too dark to see anything. They stood at the edge of the pine forest. The children sat down on the damp earth, exhausted and anxious. Smokey darted into the trees ahead, her tail low. "How are we going to fight the man-eaters?" asked a frightened Upu, her voice shaking. They had no weapons. The Russians had taken their spears when they locked up the group. In their desperate flight from the gulag, no one had stopped to gather tools or weapons from the caravan. "We just have the dogs. And my dagger," Katya said quietly. "Maybe they won't come after us." "We can hide in the forest," said Arnak, though her voice lacked conviction. Katya glanced at the tall pines looming above them. "Upu, climb a tree. Tell me what you see." Upu, nimble and fearless, dashed to the nearest trunk and scrambled up. Within seconds, she was 20 feet high. She stared toward the gulag. "They're coming," she said grimly. "They're following us." The dogs growled, picking up the scent of what was coming. Low guttural sounds echoed faintly through the trees. "Maybe we can climb the trees," Kiara suggested. Katya shook his head. "These things can climb too." How were they supposed to fight creatures like this? The thought gnawed at Katya. At best, the dogs could take down one or two, but the rest of them, unarmed and tired, would be slaughtered. In a matter of hours, they'd either be dead or something far worse. "Where are they coming from?" Katya called up to Upu, a desperate idea forming in his mind. Maybe, just maybe, he could draw them away, sacrifice himself so the others could escape. "They've spread out in a long line," Upu called back. Katya's heart dropped. They were being encircled. That plan wouldn't work now. "We have to run into the forest," said a panicked Ornon. "In different directions. Some of us might make it." "We're not separating," Arnak said firmly. "We stay together. It's the only way we survive." Smokey returned, her coat dripping wet. She stood by Katya's side, panting. Katya stroked her gently and froze. She was soaked. But there were no marshes or swamps in this part of the forest. Could it mean? "There's a river nearby," Katya shouted suddenly, eyes wide. "We have to cross it." "What?" Ukik asked, startled. "The man-eaters can't swim. They don't like water," said Katya. "How do you know that?" Kiara asked skeptically. "The first one I saw was stranded on the ice float," said Katya. "It wouldn't go into the water." Smokey had only been gone a few minutes. That meant the river had to be close. Very close. Without waiting, the tribe plunged into the forest, following Smokey as she led the way through the undergrowth. Katya spotted the reindeer herd nearby, clustered in a nervous group. Ukik caught his glance. "Maybe we can even save the animals," he said eagerly. They ran together, hearts pounding. Every second counted. Somewhere near them, the man-eaters growled. The river was wide and swift-flowing. Just the sight of it made Katya's heart soar. He knew, without doubt, it was too deep and fast for the man-eaters to cross. Behind them, the grunts and roars were growing louder. Closer. Everyone hurriedly stripped off their heavy coats and tied them into tight bundles. Katya and Ukik moved quickly, herding the reindeer into the water first. The animals hesitated only briefly before wading in. With powerful strides, they crossed and climbed up the opposite bank. The dogs, however, were more cautious, circling the water's edge and whining. The tribe members raised by the sea were expert swimmers. Even the children crossed with ease, gliding through the strong current. Timothy couldn't swim, so Katya and Orinon supported him, guiding him across while keeping their own heads above the rushing water. Aunt Yukai clung tightly to Ukik's back as they made the crossing together. Katya was still in the water when the man-eaters burst from the forest behind them. They let out howls of fury as they reached the riverbank, roaring and pacing, their eyes burning with rage as they watched their prey slipping beyond reach. The group scrambled up the far shore, gasping for breath. A heavy mist was beginning to roll in, drifting silently over the river. Katya turned and looked back, shivering. The roars behind them were deafening. The creatures had gathered near the bank, their monstrous silhouettes barely visible through the gloom. But Katya felt a wave of relief. The snowmelt from the mountains had swelled the river to an impassable width. For miles in either direction, there would be no crossing. They were safe now. As the mist thickened, the creatures gradually stopped roaring. Their prey was vanishing from sight. Kiara stepped beside Katya and took his cold, wet hands in hers. He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her. They were both soaked, trembling. He kissed her gently, knowing she was grieving. She had known the professor, Mark, Elvis, and Rob before the infection had turned their world into a nightmare. They were good people, once, and now they were gone. Together they looked back at the opposite shore. The man-eaters were barely visible through the drifting fog. Then Kiara pointed, startled. "Is that—" One of the creatures, smaller than the rest, was crouched alone by the riverbank. Katya squinted, his stomach twisted. It was the professor. Even across the river, he could see how much he had changed. His eyes were vacant, his posture twisted, unnatural. His body bore deep wounds. Whatever humanity had been in him was fading. Katya felt a sharp pang of pity, but he knew it was no longer a man. It was a man-eater. And then slowly the mist closed in like a curtain. The creature disappeared from view. Epilogue. Year 4 of the Great Infection. Katya climbed the steep hill. The harsh winter was ending. Wildflowers had begun to bloom, and the sea ice was finally melting. It had been only a year ago that he had climbed this very hill with his father. He thought back to that day. He had been different then, just a boy, still afraid of the horrors that were to come. Now he was a man, and the chieftain of the tribe. Oranon hadn't wanted the burden of leadership, and Katya had taken it on willingly. He pulled his father's wolf fur coat tighter around his shoulders as the summit's fierce winds whipped against him. Below, the guillemots had returned to the cliffside, screeching as they searched the waters for fish. Katya raised his binoculars and scanned the horizon. There was nothing but an endless, frozen expanse of water and ice. "They will come," he whispered to himself. He inhaled deeply. It hadn't been so long ago when everything had seemed utterly hopeless. He remembered the day their tribe had barely escaped the man-eater attack on the gulag. They had lost everything, supplies, sleds, tools, all abandoned in the panic. After crossing the river, they'd been left with nothing. But slowly they rebuilt. They had crafted new sleds, tied fresh ropes, and constructed their baylocks from scratch. They had migrated north, following the old paths of their ancestors toward the Arctic. Staying near the sea and large rivers became their strategy. Water was still the only true defense against the man-eaters. Katya had made bows for every member of the tribe. Archery practice became a daily ritual. Even the children now could strike a rabbit from a distance. He lowered the binoculars. If not today, then tomorrow. They would come. Katya stood in silence, gazing at the world around him. The sea was a bright, endless blue with drifting ice floes sparkling like scattered jewels. The hills near the summit had transformed into rolling carpets of pink and violet, the wildflowers bursting into bloom with the season's first sun. He decided then he would bring Kiara here. He smiled at the thought of her. She had stood beside him through everything. Brave, fierce, loyal. He loved her. And for the first time in years, he realized something else. He was happy, and he wasn't afraid anymore.